How are we doing? And today we are going to be talking about uh, From Novice to Pro, the ultimate guide to dog training. So go ahead and start posting your questions, and I'm going to answer them to the best of my ability based on my personal experience. Here we go. Excellent. And again, this is for my course on Sit, Stay, Learn From Novice to Pro, the ultimate guide to dog training. It is approximately 5.5 hours. It's a long course, but it covers a lot of skills, which the goal is to help you become a very effective and highly skilled handler and trainer of dogs, whether you're a professional dog trainer or you just want to have well-trained dogs your entire life. Okay, so once we start seeing some questions come in, I have it pulled up over here so I can see the questions as they come in and I'll be able to answer those. And then I also have the course pulled up on the side so we can see the different sections within the course that will help guide you towards being a good dog trainer. Now, while I wait for some questions to come in, I'm going to explain the process in which I went through when it came to developing the course. Okay, so perfect. We had a question come in. Is this a balanced course? So what do you mean by balanced course as far as covering obedience, behavioral, like what specifically do you mean by balanced, or do you mean balanced training where we implement corrections or all 4 quadrants of operant conditioning? I think that's probably what you mean. And yes, this does cover all 4 quadrants of operant conditioning, which that actually brings me to something that is worth talking about. And it's something that we often hear dog trainers talk about, but it's very difficult for people to fully understand these 2 specific subjects that are often discussed in dog training, and that's going to be classical conditioning and operant conditioning. And for me, I try to simplify it. What's happening, Tim? I try to simplify dog training because I need to make sure that I can get it to make sense in my own head. And once I'm able to do that, usually it makes it much easier for me to transfer that information over to my students. So again, we hear classical conditioning and we hear operant conditioning. The most simplified definition that I've been able to come up with both of these is classical conditioning is when the dog recognizes patterns within their environment outside of their control. And then operant conditioning is the dog recognizes patterns within their control. So let me give you a couple examples. Classical conditioning, again, they're recognizing patterns outside of their control. This is also known as Pavlovian conditioning. This is a big part of dog training and it's very important to understand. So Pavlovian conditioning, that's because of Ivan Pavlov. If you've listened to me talk about dog training, you've probably heard me talk about this before. But again, I'm always thinking about dog training. Even when I'm laying in bed, getting ready to go to sleep, I'm thinking about it because I always want to be able to present it in a way that's easy to understand. So some examples of classical conditioning. We know it's when the dog recognizes a pattern where a neutral stimuli predicts something that the dog either likes or doesn't like. And then when the neutral stimulus is presented to the dog, we see the change of behavior. And again, this is outside of the dog's control. They're recognizing the patterns. This is what we do with marker training or getting a dog loaded to the markers or engagement training. It's where we teach the dog. Often we'll have the dog look at us or just do a behavior that we like. We make the noise, whether it be a yes or a click, and then we follow it up with the reward. Again, this is the dog recognizing a pattern that's outside of their control. They hear the noise, we reward the dog. They hear the noise, we reward the dog. Eventually, they hear the noise, they get excited because they believe we're going to reward them. But again, this is outside of their control. They don't control whether or not we give them the reward after we say yes or after we click. And it's kind of like a contract in a sense that we make with them. But this goes with lots of things in the environment. And again, this is important for you to pay attention to because often this causes our dogs to behave in certain ways. And when we understand this, we can make adjustments to change the dog's behavior. Let me give you some natural examples. This is a big one, and this probably has happened to many of you. Slowing down, tracking. And sorry, I'm going to get to the questions too. I'm going to go in order once I get through this. So I'm going to try not to get distracted too much when the questions pop up, but I'm going to go in order and I'm going to try to hit every single question once I get through this classical and operant conditioning part, because this has been helping a lot of my students the more they understand this. So let's say you go and you grab your leash off the wall. After you grab the leash, you put the leash on your dog, you take your dog for a walk. You do this every single day. And in the very beginning, you grab the leash, no change of behavior, because it doesn't mean anything to the dog in the very beginning. But after enough of those, the dog learns the pattern, again, outside of their control. You decided to go grab the leash. You decided to put it on, and then you decided to take the dog on a walk outside of their control. But after enough of those, we see that change of behavior. This is also something that often happens with dogs that are having issues with anxiety. And I like to define anxiety as the fear of something happening in the future. So we leave our dog and our dog starts to recognize certain patterns. We grab our jacket or we grab our keys. And once we do that without the leash, let's say, now the dog knows that we're going to be leaving because we've set up this pattern that they started to recognize. And now they start to get anxious because they don't know how long they're going to be at the house by themselves. And so we can even change this feeling by changing the pattern. Same thing with the leash. If I want my dog to not, let's say I have a Labrador retriever that loves going on walks. The dog gets so crazy excited that you almost can't control him. And the dog has learned that pattern. So now you grab the leash and your dog's jumping all over the place and he's spinning and he's yelling. He's running around like Macaulay Culkin on Home Alone, screaming and yelling, and it seems like you have no control over him. That's because of the excitement that has been built up from the pattern that he's recognized. So how could we fix this? Well, we could try to make the dog stay still by adding pressure and using the leash and things like that. But something that's much easier is we change the pattern. We grab the leash, we put it back. We grab the leash, we do something else. And again, this slow down a little bit. Okay, sorry. Yeah, I'll slow down. I apologize. That's something that a lot of people have said to me, to slow down in the way that I talk. And I think that comes from my experiences in the military. For those of you that don't know, I was a drill instructor in the military. So in the Marine Corps, so the guys that run around with those Smokey the Bear campaign covers and we yell at the recruits, we also have to talk very fast, eat very fast. So some of those kind of stuck with me. So I will try to slow down. And now operant conditioning, because we often hear this as well, where someone says, I have an operant dog. Well, this is why consistency is so important in dog training. And this is why we often hear, if we have a rule in the house, we need to be consistent with enforcing it. And there's also something known as free operant, or where the dog learns behaviors, the dog learns behaviors that are outside of what we're doing, but they like it. So this is often known as self-reinforcing behaviors. The dog digs, digging feels good, so they get a reward from that, and they continue to do that. The dog rips a hole in the fence and gets to run around and run free. The dog enjoys that feeling, so then they rip another hole in the fence. These are patterns the dog is learning that they have control of, but it's not really necessarily part of what we're doing as far as directly interacting with the dog. But then let's say you have a rule where you don't want the dog to jump up on the sofa. Again, we'd want to be consistent with it, because what makes a dog really confident, that big part of being an operant dog, is the dog knows how to behave in their environment to make good things happen and things to avoid that can predict something unpleasant. And this is why it's so important, because if a dog knows what behaviors trigger rewards or might trigger rewards, what behaviors might trigger some sort of correction or reinforcement, they learn to perform the behaviors that make good things happen, and they learn to avoid the behaviors that make bad things happen. So again, that's something, it's very simple once you start to understand it, but it's also something we want to be aware of, because I can't tell you guys how many times I've been working with someone and they're telling me about something their dog is doing, and it's simply because the dog was classically conditioned to the environment or the situation that caused the dog to get excited or caused the dog to become fearful, which that's what counter conditioning is. Counter conditioning is the same as classical conditioning, but instead of a neutral stimulus, like grabbing the leash, that example, that was neutral in the beginning, it's a stimulus that the dog perceives as negative. So I used to always say fear-inducing. It's not necessarily fear-inducing. It's just a stimulus the dog may not like. It could be fear-inducing, but it could also be something the dog doesn't like. And then if that predicts something pleasant, whereas initially, I don't like this thing. Oh, but it predicts this really amazing reward or this game of play with my human that I love to play tug with so much. Maybe it's not so bad. And then they can become conditioned to that. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, and this is something I thought about initially, where it's like, okay, the dog's classically conditioned and the dog learns if I sit, my human might say yes, and my human might follow up and give me a reward. So wouldn't that be operant conditioning? Well, the operant condition is the dog understanding that the sit might make us reward them. But again, they don't control whether or not we give them the reward after we use the marker. So I hope all that makes sense, because again, it's simple, but it really does help when you start thinking about these things within the world that your dog lives. Okay, do you have a better way to get alert on scent? So I don't have any scent stuff in this course, but as far as scent detection, I do have that short little series on my YouTube channel. The way that I like to teach the alert, and again, this is understanding patterns or having the dog recognize patterns. Once I teach the dog that the odor predicts something that they like, and even if you're not doing any scent detection stuff, but you really want to understand how dogs think, and this is something that I learned through experience. When I initially went to the school, I was only interested in obedience. I really didn't care about scent detection or tracking or protection or service dog. Service dog, there's a lot of obedience. I just wanted obedience. I love the thought of doing obedience training with the dog. But the more I learned these other subjects within the world of dog training, the more I understood how dogs learn. And that transfers over to everything that you do with your dog. So when I'm teaching a dog an odor, I'm teaching the dog that the odor, like a dog doesn't like the smell of cocaine because of the smell of cocaine. They like the smell of cocaine because it predicts a reward. So that goes back to classical conditioning. I smell this odor, whether it's narcotics or it's bomb detection or it's maybe a diabetic alert dog. That's going to be a little different. Let's not use that example. So let's do narcotics or bomb detection. So they learn these odors, and then the odor predicts something the dog likes. So I smell marijuana, I get to play tug. I smell marijuana, I get to play tug. The dog's classically conditioned to that odor predicting a reward. So now that has value. When I'm first doing scent detection, I show the dog that pattern. I don't ask for a behavior. I go, odor means this, odor means this, odor means this, over and over and over again. So the dog gets excited when they smell the odor. Once I start to see that change of behavior, then I create a new pattern. So you think the initial pattern is odor, reward, odor, reward. Then it turns into odor, I ask for behavior, then the reward. So odor, behavior, reward. And I tell the dog what the behavior is that I want them to perform. So I say, I want you to sit. I want you to lay down. I want you to look at me. Whatever behavior I want the dog to do as the indication, I tell them. Now, I personally don't like the technique of having the dog scratch, and a lot of law enforcement and military has gotten away with that because of the potential downsides. You don't want a dog scratching at an explosive device, and you don't want a dog scratching at somebody's vehicle. So the passive indication tends to be something that's more commonly implemented. You could also do barking. I don't really like the barking. I like the sit and staring at where the dog has found the odor, because that's most clear. And we can do that again by teaching the dog that pattern. So that's how I like to do it. Dog gets the odor, I tell them what to do, then I reward them once they do it. And after we do that enough times, it'll get to the point where the dog will smell the odor and they go, oh, I have to do the behavior, and then I get the reward. So then we would get the indication. And of course, then you have to watch out for things like false indication when the dog's trying to get a reward. So yeah, the course now, balance training, I do consider myself a balanced dog trainer. And what is a balanced dog trainer? It's always important to define what it is that we're talking about. So for me, a balanced trainer is someone that uses all four quadrants of operant conditioning, but one that I mean, it's not as cut and dry as like, oh, we just use all four, because you could have a trainer that is considered more of a traditional style trainer, depending on where they start within those quadrants. So traditional, they start more with positive punishment right from the beginning. So you have a dog in front of you, you tell the dog sit, and then you correct the dog into the sit position. That's more traditional. But that trainer might still use all four quadrants. After the dog sits through the correction, they would give the dog the reward. So they're using positive punishment, positive reinforcement. They might use negative punishment if the dog doesn't perform the behavior, or they might stop petting the dog if the dog jumps up. Some of these commonly used techniques. And they might even use leash pressure. But the way that I like to define a balanced trainer is a balanced trainer starts primarily with positive reinforcement. And for those of you that are listening and you may not be completely clear on the difference, because this is very confusing for a lot of people, it confused the heck out of me in the beginning. The easiest way to think about this is positive means adding. So don't think positive is good or negative is bad, at least not in this context. And this is what often confuses people, because you think to yourself, how can a punishment be positive? That doesn't make sense. Well, it's because we're adding. That's what that means. So positive means adding to the equation or the situation. And it doesn't always have to be physical either. Yelling at your dog could be a form of positive punishment. Not recommended, but that's an example of positive punishment. It's not physical, but we're adding something the dog doesn't like to prevent the repeat of the behavior. Punishment means preventing the repeat of the behavior. Reinforcement means encouraging the repeat of the behavior. So if we are using negative reinforcement or positive reinforcement, we are encouraging the repeat of the behavior. Punishment is preventing the repeat of the behavior. And then you might be asking yourself, well, a moment ago when you were talking about traditional style dog training, they correct the dog into the position. Day one, they say sit, and then they correct the dog. So they're using positive punishment. But the positive punishment in that situation is not teaching the dog the behavior of sitting. The dog goes into the sit to escape the punishment. And this is why a lot of people don't like that style of training, because the dog is being punished before they're even taught what they're supposed to do. It's considered very unfair to a lot of people, including myself. I think it's unfair. So with a balanced trainer, we often start with reward-based training. We're using rewards to show the dog what we want them to do. We teach them the concept of markers, that engagement training, where we teach the dog, hey, if you pay attention to me, there's going to be value to that. And we pay them for that, and that's how we get them conditioned to those markers. And then after we do that, we teach them how to follow the food lure, which the course covers this. It covers the engagement training. I also have a whole section on food handling skills. Now, food handling skills might sound silly, but let me point out the importance of being a good handler. You can read all the books that you want on dog training. You can watch all the instructional videos that you want on dog training, but if you don't put it into practice, you're not going to be good at the skill. Now, some people naturally are going to be more athletic, or they're going to have better timing just instinctively based on their past experiences. But if we want to be good trainers, we have to train dogs, and we have to train a lot of dogs if we want to have that understanding, or what's the word I'm looking for? Us being generalized, but having a large frame of reference where if you were, and this is more so for dog trainers, but even when you're training your own personal dog, the more you train your dog, the better you're going to get. Because again, you can understand the ideas behind training, but if you don't put it into practice, you're not going to be that good. And this is why a lot of the stuff in the video is to develop your skills as a trainer. And let me give you an example of this too, even with my YouTube channel. I often read the comments to see what people are asking, or if they have questions or they're curious about things. And something that has commonly come up in a lot of my videos and other dog trainers I know that have YouTube channels is people will put comments and they'll say, it would be nice if you demonstrated this with an untrained dog. Now, in a lot of my videos, I use my dogs. I use dogs that have been trained to teach the process, but there's at least 50 of my videos, maybe more, where I'm using a completely untrained dog, and people will still have that comment. Use a dog that hasn't been trained. The dog hasn't been trained. But when we can enhance our skills as a handler or trainer, A well-trained trainer can make an untrained dog look really good. And an untrained handler or trainer could make a really well-trained dog look poor or look bad at their performance. So skills is important. So at the very beginning, I cover food handling skills. Now this might sound silly, but in the beginning, when we're working with a new dog, you have a puppy or even a dog that's not a puppy, it just doesn't have very good focus. It lacks the ability to maintain that attention on you when you're trying to teach them, even if there is no distractions. And that can also be something that is developed as us being the handler, meaning I had students before where they weren't really good at handling the food. They weren't good at reloading the food and getting more food ready, especially in the beginning when this is most important, when we're doing that continuous reinforcement before we start randomizing the rewards or changing the frequency of the reward. And the puppy might, or the dog might get the treat. They're like, I got the treat, but the dog has already learned the pattern that when the human gives the treat, the human has to take time, find the next treat, fumble around. And because the dog knows this, in the beginning, the dog might look and go, all right, what are we doing next? What are we doing next? And then they walk off. And now you have a dog that takes the treat and then goes and does something else to occupy themselves while they're waiting for the handler to get the next treat. So food handling skills is really important. So I created a whole section on that, and it's definitely worth going through it. Again, if you want to be good. So if we think about sports, the only sport I do is jujitsu, so I don't know the other sports very well. But I know that football, I've seen them with the tires and they run through the tires. There's no tires in the game of football, but why did they do that exercise? Why did they do that exercise? Because it enhances the athlete's ability to perform better when they're playing. At least that would be my assumption. Again, I'm not an expert on football, but these skills are very important. So in the course, based on the 4 quadrants, if so, I would need something higher since I'm already familiar with that. So with the course, the 4 quadrants, that is the foundation of a lot of training. And again, that develops the opera dog, the dog who understands that their behavior has an effect on their environment. Now the course does have, I believe, a 30-day money-back guarantee through Sit, Stay, Learn. So I'm going to break down very quickly how the course is structured and my thought process behind putting the course together. Because when we understand dog training, let's take something as simple as the sit. Well, how could we define a perfect sit? I have so many people on a regular basis tell me their dog knows a sit. I go, great, your dog knows a sit. Can you show me? And they go up to the dog and they go sit, 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 and they do all kinds of different gestures. And then finally the dog sits, and then the dog gets up right away. I was like, well, I wouldn't define that as a very good sit. Sure, the dog sat, but did the dog sit because it was responding to the command? Was it because we were making a bunch of noise and doing our hand gesture? Can the dog sit from a distance? Can the dog sit wherever the person is relative to the dog? Can the dog sit with distractions? Can the dog maintain the position? So that's how I would define it. I would define it a dog that sits on command regardless of where they are relative to the handler, regardless of the environment, and maintain the position until released or given a new command. That's very difficult to do. And of course, most dogs, we don't need a perfect sit. A good sit is usually good enough for most people if we're looking at practical obedience. But if I'm going to be able to do that, if I want to be able to teach a dog to be really good at commands, even as something as simple as a sit, if I need the dog to understand it in different positions relative to me, so if I have the dog off to the side, if I have the dog sitting on their dog bed, if I have the dog in front of me, to the left of me, to the right of me, I have to teach the dog this. If I just teach a dog a sit directly in front of me, and then I ask the dog to sit in a different context, they're going to come around, usually more often than not, directly in front of me, and that's where they're going to sit because that's where they learn the position. So they weren't generalized to it yet. And this often creates a lot of pitfalls for new dog owners. I can't tell you how many times I've heard this one. Someone has their dog out in the world in a public environment or a local park, and they're telling their dog to do something, the dog's not performing, and they go, you know this, you know this. The dog doesn't. Not in that situation, because they did not get the dog generalized to the training. So there's a rule called the rule of 8. Some people call it the rule of 9. This is just a rough estimate. It's going to vary depending on the dog, but usually around 8 or 9 different of whatever it is that you're working on before the dog becomes fully generalized, where they start to perform regardless of where they are, or regardless because of the environment. So I had to teach, okay, so if I want the perfect sit, I have to teach you how to do the sit, but then I also have to teach you how to get the dog in different positions relative to you, how to get the dog to sit in those different positions, how to get the dog to maintain. So you can't just teach someone, this is how you do a sit. You lift up on the food, nose goes up, butt goes down, you give the dog the food. After the dog understands the cues, you start to randomize the rewards, and there you go, that's it. No, because then we also need to know, how do we teach the dog the stay? If we want to teach the dog the stay, then we also have to teach the dog, we don't have to, but it's recommended, the concept of leash pressure, where we're implementing or utilizing negative reinforcement. And remember, negative reinforcement is not a punishment, it's reinforcing the repeat of the behavior. So part 1 is basic introduction, info, the equipment that I use in the course, food handling breakdown. I also talk about what I like to call environmental difficulty assessment. So this goes back to what we were just talking about. I like to call environmental difficulty assessment, I do a scale of 0 to 5, where we are evaluating the environment in which we're asking our dog to perform. And the difficulty is based on the distractions within the environment. So if I have, hey, it's all good, it's no problem being late, you can always rewind the video. So if I have a dog that really likes squirrels, the more squirrels in the environment, or let's say tennis balls, because we can control tennis balls, or just balls that the dogs like to play with, chuck it or whatever, and I can have a bunch of those in the environment, the more I have, the more distraction that might create. If I start moving them, then it adds a greater distraction. So distractions are motivational factors outside of what we are offering our dog. I don't want the dog to run and chase the squirrel. I want the dog to pay attention to me. And this is another reason, and this is something that's really important for service dogs, and I often tell my clients that are training their dog to be a service dog, don't let people pet your dog. You can have certain situations where you let people pet, but what's the reasoning behind this? And for me, I always need to know why. Don't just tell me to do something. Give me an actual reason why, and then I'm going to be more likely to comply. Well, the reason for this is, if a dog learns when they go out on an adventure with their human and they get to go up and say hi to different people, and different people are giving them treats, and different people are petting them and loving on them, then the dog is going to expect that. And when they see people, especially if it's happened with more than 8 people, they become generalized. Now, every time they see someone, they want to run up to them, they want to say hi, and then it gets to the point where the human doesn't want that anymore, and now they try to prevent the dog from doing it, and the dog starts to become leash reactive, because leash reactivity is often developed through frustration, because the dog goes, I get rewarded for that. Here's another real common one, and this came up the other day when I was working with one of my students, specifically for service dog training. She started to bring up the concept, or not the concept, but that her dog begs a lot during dinner. And I'm like, well, or during mealtime. And I said, well, what does your dog do? She comes and she sits and she stares at me, and it's so frustrating. I'm like, you're teaching her to do that. She goes, what do you mean? I said, well, when we're doing obedience, we have food. We ask the dog to do something, sit, look at us, and there's a good chance that if the dog does that, we're going to reward them. So even if we don't ask the dog to do that, if we have food, there's a huge probability that the dog is going to do that in the hopes of getting a reward. And then what do we do as the human? Stop begging. The dog's not begging. And then she said, well, the dog knows that that food is mine and this food is hers. And I said, no, the dog doesn't know that, because the example was, if I leave my food on the table, let's say it's a steak, I say, leave it, that's mine, and I walk away and my dog knows to leave it. And then I said, okay, but that's no different than taking a piece of your dog's food, setting it on the floor, and having your dog in a sit stay or down stay and walking away, and the dog has to wait. The dog believes there's a chance they're going to get that reward. So in a situation like that, instead we tell the dog, how about you go to your climb bed, and then I can sit down and eat, and when I finish, now I can reward you for maintaining the stay. sorry, I go in all kinds of different directions. That's part of my ADD. Environmental difficulty assessment. So when we're training our dog, the analogy that I like to use, if you've ever played a video game, anyone who's listening, the levels progress in difficulty based on the skill of the player, or at least the way the game's set up. So level 1 is going to be significantly easier than level 10. This is the same when we're working with our dog. The environment we can consider a level in difficulty. So the very first level is going to be at the house, very little distractions, very neutral environment. As the dog gets really good in that environment, then we go to the next level of difficulty. Now, this doesn't mean that we can't take our dog to an environment that is significantly more difficult than where we train them. It just means we have to adjust what we expect the dog to do in that environment. Here's a common one. Somebody teaches their dog a sit-stay. They think it's really good. The dog is your happy-go-lucky golden retriever or whatever, and they take the dog out. Someone wants to come up and say hi. They tell the dog to sit. And as the person's coming up to say hi, that's increasing greatly the difficulty of the environment for that dog, because it loves people, it loves being pet. And now it's breaking the sit stay, and the human's correcting the dog for breaking the sit stay, forcing him to go back in the sit, implementing negative punishment. And all this conflict is simply because they're asking too much from the dog too soon based on the skills in which the dog developed. So environmental difficulty assessment is very important when you're working with your dog, and understanding, is this environment an adequate level to where my dog can perform, or is this environment too difficult? And then I cover avoiding common mistakes. So common mistakes, like I said, a big one is yelling at the dog, not being consistent with training. And I say yelling at a dog, and the reason why, because it is positive punishment, but the reason why I tell people to avoid yelling at their dog is because it makes corrections personal. And we don't want to make corrections personal. We don't want to involve our emotions inside of a correction, but rather the correction should be very matter of fact. That goes back to the operant conditioning. If my dog learns that I have a rule where my dog's not allowed on the sofa, and I go through the proper steps to teach the dog, and the way that I do that is I do what I like to call a teachable moment. After I teach a dog the concept of leash pressure, this is where we're implementing negative reinforcement. We turn the pressure of the leash on. When the dog complies, we turn it off. A good example, a human analogy, is the beeping in the car to get you to buckle your seatbelt. That's negative reinforcement. It's an unpleasant sound. Once we comply, the unpleasant sound goes away, reinforcing the act of us buckling our seatbelt. So I teach the dog leash pressure because I often want to be able to communicate with my dog a certain behavior I want them to perform without having to use a food lure, especially if I don't want to reward the dog, because this would be a sequence in which the dog is triggering us. They are initiating the sequence. If I tell a dog to sit or I tell a dog to lay down, I'm initiating that sequence. But if the dog jumps up on the bed and I have to respond to that because I have a rule where I don't want the dog on the bed or on the sofa, the dog is initiating this sequence. And if I tell the dog to get off and I use a food lure, and then I reward the dog, I've actually encouraged the repeat of jumping up on the sofa. So the way that I do it is I use negative reinforcement. Another common example of negative reinforcement is using blocking or body pressure. You've probably done this with your dog as well. If you walk towards your dog and your dog backs up, that's a form of negative reinforcement. We're adding pressure even though we're not physically touching the dog. When the dog complies, that pressure goes away. So the dog jumps up on the sofa. This is where I use the word wrong, which I've been thinking about switching the word, because far too often as humans, we think about the dictionary definition. Oh, if I say wrong, I'm telling the dog they're wrong. And so then what people end up doing is they end up changing the way they say wrong. They go, wrong. It's like, no, we don't want to. It's not like we're telling the dog you're wrong. Dog doesn't pull up a dictionary and go, I'm wrong. That means the action I did or the sound I made is incorrect. And that's not what we're doing. Now, even though in a sense, yeah, the dog's wrong, we don't want him to jump up on the sofa, but that's not always the case, especially if the dog is doing things that it's okay for them to repeat. It's just not in that specific situation. So like breaking a stay. If a dog breaks a stay, inherently that behavior, there's nothing wrong with it. It's only incorrect because we want them to maintain the stay, and so the dog broke the position. Whereas a sofa is a little bit more clear. But anyways, the dog jumps up. This is where I would say wrong. Now, when I say wrong to a dog, this doesn't mean I'm going to punish them. So I'm not punishing the dog for jumping up on the sofa. This is what I like to call, this is how I teach my boundaries as well as teaching my stay. And I've done this with countless dogs, and it works on pretty much every single dog. And this greatly reduces any sort of stress the dog will experience if we're good at it. So I say wrong for a reason. Wrong because in the moment I'm reacting to the dog. And in this situation, I could tell the dog to get off of the sofa. So I could say off. Dog jumps up, off, and now I'm going to help the dog get off using negative reinforcement, usually leash pressure or body pressure, to get the dog to jump off the sofa. But the reason why I say wrong instead of the command is because, again, we're being reactive to the dog. If the dog starts to learn, or if the dog randomly does something and I'm not ready for it, dog jumps up on the sofa, I might find myself going, down, sit, off. Okay, I really messed that up. So instead of making that mistake, I just go off, because we want to say off. And this is another thing that catches a lot of people to where it confuses them or it makes them become stressed out during training, is the 1 second rule. I've also heard people say 1.3 seconds or 1.5 seconds to influence a dog's behavior, meaning connecting behavior to the consequence, whether that consequence is good or bad. The consequence doesn't have to be a second. So if I'm going to reward my dog, I don't have to give my dog a 1 second reward. The dog just has to know that the reward is coming within a second, approximately, from doing the behavior. So the butt hits the ground. Once the butt hits the ground, after a second, if I don't let the dog know they're going to be rewarded, there's a good chance that the dog will think they're being rewarded for duration in the position instead of being rewarded for going into the position. And the reward, this is what I like to call the reward event, a term I picked up from Michael Ellis. I consider the GOAT, he's amazing. Is the event can take a couple seconds, it can take 5 minutes. I could have my dog perform a behavior, enter a reward event, and play 5 minutes of tug with my dog. And those 5 minutes of tug is the reward that the dog got for doing the one behavior that I asked them to perform. So going back to the dog jumping up. So when the dog jumps up, I have approximately a second to let them know that's not a behavior that I want. And if I know wrong is what I utilize in all situations, break the stay, I say wrong. Violate a boundary, I say wrong. Then the dog goes, what is it you would like me to do in this situation? And I calmly walk over and I guide the dog off of the sofa using the leash. And I use the leash because I don't reward the dogs after a teachable moment. I might say good boy or good girl, but I don't give them a reward. Because again, if I give them a treat, then the dog learns, oh, you want me to jump up on the sofa. I jump up on the sofa, I come off of the sofa, you give me a treat, awesome. And I get to trigger this sequence, I'm gonna do this all day. And now they start doing it more frequently and it's having the opposite effect. So the dog jumps up, wrong, I guide the dog off. Once the dog is off, good dog, nice job, and I praise the dog. And in that situation, we were not punishing the act of the dog jumping up on the sofa, but rather we were reinforcing the act of the dog jumping off of the sofa when we say wrong in that situation. Dog enters a kitchen, I say wrong, what do I want? I want the dog to leave the kitchen. Dog breaks the stay, I say wrong, what do I want? I want the dog to go back to the stay. And something that might be better for a lot of people is maybe saying something like, oops, dog made a mistake, oops, uh-oh, but it's not going to predict a punishment. We're reinforcing the act of the dog doing what we want after we say wrong. So that's a very important distinction to understand. I even had someone on one of my videos try to argue with me on it, where they were saying, no, that's positive punishment because you said it when the dog broke the position. It's like, I wasn't punishing it. I was reinforcing the act of the behavior that I want. But I bring this up because I do that until the dog learns the rule. Okay, I'm not allowed to jump up on the sofa. Every time I jump up on the sofa, my human tells me to get off of the sofa. It's very clear that you don't want me on there. And then eventually what's going to happen, the dog jumps up, you go wrong, dog jumps off right away. They learned how to respond to the word wrong. And once I see that, if I want full reliability, I transition to a correction. Now, it's not mandatory. So There's a lot of people out there, and this is completely fine. You could be one of them yourself, where you go, I don't want to correct my dog. I understand it may make the obedience more reliable, but it's not something that I want to do. And I'm completely fine with that, and I completely respect that. So in this situation, you would just keep having to use negative reinforcement every time the dog jumped up. And if you're good at it, eventually your dog will stop trying to jump up. They will stop because they've never been rewarded for it and they're always asked to come off of it. So they're like, forget it. What's the point? It just takes a little bit more. It takes more repetition. So when we implement the correction, then we get pretty quick reliability if we taught the rules correctly in the beginning. So now the dog jumps up and I say no, that's my marker for positive punishment. And after I say no, now the dog is going to receive a correction for jumping up on the sofa. So now the dog's actually punished for the behavior. That's the first time I punished the dog for the behavior. Every other time we were showing the dog the preferred behavior, which is very important in dog training. So now the dog actually gets the correction, and if you do it the right way, you usually get pretty instant reliability once we add the correction. This is something I've had a lot of my students where I'm teaching them how to do loose leash walking, and I follow the same concept that I do for boundaries and the stay. So I like to define loose leash walking as a mobile stay. The dog has to maintain a position relative to us, the handler. So if I'm walking forward and I define my heel position as the position directly to my left or directly to my right, if my dog starts to leave that position, whether they're going wide, forward, or they're going behind me, then I would implement a teachable moment. I would say wrong, I bring the dog back into the heel position, turn off the pressure, good dog. And I do this over and over again until eventually the dog goes ahead of me, I say wrong, and the dog jumps back into the position on their own, which is also important for me to say this, and it's something I talk about a lot. We have to be very careful to not overshadow our commands with the physical cue. I often call this pairing in my videos. And this is something that will greatly slow down the speed in which your dog learns the verbal communication. Our verbals should predict our physicals in most situations, and that's how dogs learn. The dog goes ahead of me and I say wrong at the same time I pull the dog back using leash pressure. The dog focuses on that physical of the leash, bringing them back into the position and the movement we're asking them to perform, and they do not pay attention to me saying the word wrong. I have to say the word wrong. They have to hear just that. So they're walking wrong, huh? Leash pressure. Oh, after enough of those, they hear wrong, then they will respond before the pressure is added. Same thing with the other stay and the sofa example. After enough of those, dog goes ahead, we say wrong, the dog will jump back into the position, showing us that they understand what we want them to do when we say wrong, or in that situation, you could also say heel. That's fine. The experience is the same to the dog. We just don't reward when we bring the dog back, because again, then the dog will learn, go ahead, come back, get a reward. And you can see how that could be a really big pitfall and a sequence that could create more issues in the future. So we don't reward them after a teachable moment. So I've had lots of students where I have them practicing this, then they reach out, they call me and they say, my dog responds really well when I say wrong, but she or he is still going ahead of me in the walk. So, and I'll say, so the dog goes ahead of you, you say wrong, and you don't use the leash at all, you don't guide the dog at all, and the dog jumps back in position. They say, correct. Excellent. That just means you're ready for the next step. And then in the next step, that's where we would add the correction. And if you did the training the right way, the one correction, when I say correction, excuse me, I'm usually referring to a leash pop on a training collar. And again, if you're the type of person, I don't want to do a leash pop, don't do the leash pop. Just do the pressure, and eventually you will get reliability. It just takes more repetition. Also, if you are looking at safety, so let's say you have a very rambunctious dog and you want everyone in the family, and perhaps you have little kids, then in that case, I would correct the dog, because I don't want the dog to run forward at any point and knock one of the small children down. So often I will correct, especially when dealing with little kids, for safety reasons, to prevent the dog from doing something that could potentially hurt the kids. And not even intentional, it'd be accidental. The dog's happy and excited, sees something, runs forward, kid falls down. That's no good for anybody. So depending on your situation can change how you're going to work with your dog. But once we add the correction, if we get instant reliability, or if we add the correction, we get instant reliability, then it shows us that we did the training correctly. And sorry, someone just asked, what question are we on? I'm gonna I'm going to stop bouncing all over the place. I'm going to try to be more direct so I can answer everyone's questions instead of, if you guys can't tell, I'm very passionate about this stuff. And there's a lot that's involved when we're working with our dogs as far as how things kind of mix in with other things within the world of dog training. Okay, any advice on slowing down tracking? Once we start with the pad, I have a hard time slowing him down and following the nose. So tracking, I'm not the best when it comes to tracking. I have done tracking. I've done tracking all the way up to a Schitzen level 3 track that was required when I was going through the Tom Rose school. But even when I did my tracking videos, I reached out to who I think is one of the goats of tracking, which is Tom Rose. And he even helped me with it. So slowing down, what I would probably do to get a dog to slow down is I would go back steps in the training and I would add more food on the track to give the dog an incentive again to focus on the actual footsteps of the track. Because one of the things that did speed up a lot of students when I was teaching at the Tom Rose School for tracking was they would reward the dog only when the dog got to the article. And those of you that don't know what I'm talking about, tracking, it's something that's used in, they have AKC tracking, I believe, but the main one is Schitzen or IGP, and it's a 3-part routine: protection, obedience, and tracking. And the dogs have to do these tracking routines, and the difficulty is dependent on the level, whether they're in a IGP 1, 2, 3, or an FH track. And what it is someone walks a certain pre-designed route with a certain amount of paces and a certain amount of turns. And then there's articles. The articles is something that is set down, and when the dog gets to the article, they have to indicate, and they have to maintain that indication, and then the handler walks up, and also the handler is 20 feet away on a long line, unless they changed that, but last time I looked, I think it's 20-foot long line, and you're just walking behind your dog, and your dog's 20 paces ahead of you, and your dog is having to do the track, doing that perfect track. Did I miss a super... Any guidance? Oh, sorry. Thanks for bringing that up. I appreciate that. So one of the mistakes that people make is they teach the dog. They start to get away from rewarding the dog on the track, and they start rewarding the dog only when the dog gets to the article. If your dog learns that, if your dog figures out that pattern, there's a good chance that the dog will increase speed because they're trying to get to the article, because that's where they've been rewarded the most. And that's one of the most common things that I saw with students when I was teaching at the Tom Rose School. But again, I wouldn't consider myself an expert in tracking, but that would be something I would look at to see if you're rewarding mostly at the articles, or if you started spacing out the rewards too much, you haven't randomized it, and that will often change your dog's speed. And this also falls in line with obedience. So let me give you an example. I'm drawing a blank on what it's called, but there was different studies that were conducted on different ways in which we can reward our dogs, or reward, I think in the study they were doing rats or something like that. But one is where you reward the dog after a certain amount of time. So let's say after every 30 seconds is when I reward the dog, as long as the dog is performing up to 30 seconds. And if the dog messes up, I reset the timer. So what ends up happening is the dog figures out every 30 seconds they get a reward. So what we see is we see an increase in speed and motivation before the dog is going to get the reward. And then after they get the reward, there's a drop in motivation. It's like going to work on Monday. I got the whole week. And then Friday, we're a little bit more excited. So certain ways in which we reward our dogs can greatly impact their performance, their motivation, and their excitement when working with us. And so that's something important to keep in mind too. Okay, so sorry, I can't believe I skipped that question. Any guidance on becoming a helper? The best way to become a helper, and I'm assuming you're talking about being a decoy, is to go online and look at local clubs that are in your area, whether you're looking at IGP, French Ring, PSA, which is Protection Sport Association, or Mondio Ring. Those are the most common ones you're going to see in the States. And I think PSA is now in Canada and in Mexico. I don't know if it's gone beyond that, but a lot of the other ones like French Ring, IGP, Mondio Ring, I'm pretty sure they're in a lot of different countries. So if you can find a club that's local to you, go to the club and ask them if you can be a decoy for the club. That's one of the best ways to start learning. And there's a couple things that's really valuable with training with a club. Often, a percentage of the club members are professional dog trainers, and they're going to help you learn how to be a better trainer, or at least they're going to teach you techniques and things that they have used over their years of experience that have helped them. And even if they're not a professional trainer, so the last club that I was training with, a Schutzen club, the head guy, his name was also Tom. He has been doing Schutzen for like 30 years, never trained dogs professionally, but this guy knows dog training. And I was learning a lot of stuff from him, even though he didn't do it professionally. He has done competition for 30 years, and I was able to pick up stuff from him even after training professionally for 12 years. So going to a club and then being willing to get in the suit, being willing to put on the bite sleeve, and working as many dogs as you can. So the bigger the club, the better it's going to be. And after you've been doing it for a while, if you feel like you're pretty good, you know the rules of the sport, then they will often host decoy certifications. So I was certified in PSA. I'm not certified anymore. That expired. I didn't re-up it. But when I was doing PSA, Protection Sport Association, I was with a PSA club, and we trained Protection Sport Associate. We trained that protection sport. I believe we're doing 3 times a week. So 3 times a week, I trained with them, and I was in the bite suit for multiple hours every single time working with them. And then the Tom Rose School hosted a decoy certification. I did the first one. I failed the first one. And then I did it again in Chicago, and I passed it the second time. So you really just have to do it, and that's going to be the best. And when you're training with a club, what's really good about this is you're going to learn the training aspect of being a decoy, and you're going to learn the trial aspect of being a decoy. It's different. You'll have some decoys or some helpers out there who are really good decoys when it comes to training and teaching a new dog, and they may not be as good when it comes to a trial. And then you have the guys that are really good trial decoys, but they're not as good at teaching. And there is differences. So like a trial decoy, a really good trial decoy is often very athletic, especially if you're looking at French ring. French ring demands a lot from their decoys. So they're very fast. They're like ninjas in those bite suits. A helper decoy doesn't have to be as physically capable as a trial decoy, because a lot of it is not having to run around in the field and being able to read the dog and being able to read the grip and knowing when to add pressure, knowing when not to add pressure. And these things will also enhance your skills as a dog trainer. Okay. Last year, some heavy fireworks was thrown our way. Ever since, he is afraid of every single little bang. Food, toys, nothing works in that moment. What can I do to help him in this time of the year? So fireworks, that is a difficult one, and that's when we're, I do have a video on it, and one of the best ways is the counter conditioning. And again, counter conditioning is taking something that the dog perceives as bad, negative, something they're afraid of, and we pair it with something pleasant. What's difficult about fireworks, and it's also really dependent on your dog's genetics. So something that may work on a dog that's just more of a stable and structured dog when it comes to their overall confidence within the environment. Even if something bad happens, they recover more quickly. Other dogs, something could happen and they're afraid of it for a very long time. So we don't know how many reps that it's going to take in order to get the dog to overcome this fear, but often it is a certain amount of reps. Now, another thing that has helped me with dogs in the past that were afraid of fireworks is I would play white noise or brown noise in the house. So I would play brown noise and I would play pretty loud, and that would often mask some of the fireworks. So it wouldn't be as extreme sounding to the dog when it went off. And if we think about counter conditioning and desensitization, this is where we're taking whatever the stimulus is that is creating the fear-inducing stimulus. If we can decrease the intensity, whether through size, through volume, or through distance, see you, Nathan, then we're going to be able to find the sweet spot. So let's use distance. If I have a dog afraid of something and I increase the distance, 30 feet, still getting a bad reaction. 40 feet, still getting a bad reaction. 50 feet, oh, this is good. Okay, now I'm going to reward the dog and work with the dog at that distance. And then over time, I'm going to slowly get closer and closer. And again, this is difficult with fireworks because it's outside of your control. So you can try to do versions of this by playing it on your phone or your speakers. You can get those little tiny poppers that you throw on the ground and throw one pop, give your dog a reward, throw one pop, give your dog a reward, so your dog can understand it. But it is one of those things that can be difficult depending on how sensitive your dog is to the fireworks. And here's another thing. If we're trying to desensitize a dog to something, some dogs will become desensitized to it just by exposure. We expose them over and over and over again. But some dogs will actually become sensitive. They will become more fearful of it. So there's a fine line when we're doing this. Like, you wouldn't want to take your dog outside, pop a firework off every single time you take your dog outside, thinking that's going to desensitize them to it. It might make them more sensitive to it. It might make them where they don't want to go outside. So this probably isn't the best answer you're hoping for. But if I was working with the dog, I would do my best to build the dog's confidence in exercises not related to fireworks. So just doing obedience, showing the dog how to navigate within their world. And that's often done through obedience, giving them a clear path of what they should do, what they shouldn't do. And it also creates that bond that we have with our dogs, the more training that we do with them. On top of that, I would do the exercises as far as trying to get the dog comfortable with the different sounds and pairing it with something pleasant, minimizing it as much as possible to where the dog can handle it. And then also, when fireworks are going off, it's outside of your control. Playing brown noise or playing white noise has helped me with dogs that I worked with that were cautious, nervous, or fearful of fireworks. Okay, there are a few people here. Oh, it just jumped. Okay. Sorry, it jumped down to the bottom. Okay, there's a few people here watching, and the response is, if you can slow down. Okay, yep. Leash reactivity for a dog that is perfectly sociable, sweet off leash with both dogs and humans. On leash, still great with humans, but dogs instant focus and reactivity. So often, this is very common where we have a dog that is not reactive on leash, but the moment we put them on a leash, it creates that frustration. So you probably have seen a video where there's been a few viral videos where it shows a fence and you have dogs on one side barking, bark, bark, and dogs on the other side, they're barking, they're going nuts at each other, and the fence opens and they're all like, oh, hey, what's up? And they're instantly cool. When we put barriers, when we prevent a dog from being able to do something, it can often create frustration, and that frustration can come out. Thanks, Robin, I appreciate that. That frustration can come out as a dog being reactive, and usually a dog being reactive on a leash is the dog expressing their frustration. You can see a perfect example of this with people that do sport work or protection training specifically. When I'm doing... Thank you. I appreciate that. Oh, excellent. Dog trainer. Beautiful. And I plan on doing more of these, specifically where I talk to dog trainers. I love dog trainers. Love you guys. Love everyone on here. You're all awesome, especially listening to me talk about one of my all-time favorite subjects. So it means a lot. I lost my train of thought. What were we talking about? Oh, yeah, being reactive. So if you watch someone who's doing protection training, when we're first teaching, so this is called drive building. I have an example on my video where we were teaching Harley to bark on leash. That's my friend's service dog, Sergio. And so we put the dog on a back tie. We tease the dog with a toy. When the dog becomes frustrated, we reward the dog with the toy. If you look at that, you will see the behavior that she is doing. If you were to see that outside of that context, you would go, that dog is leash reactive. Because that's exactly what we're doing. We're rewarding the dog during sport work really for being leash reactive as far as how a lot of people would define it. Dogs jumping, barking, pulling, doing everything that they can to get to what they want. And then when we reward them, we reinforce that behavior, which that's valuable in sport work because we want that drive. And then of course we have to control it, but we want the dog to be built up and we want them to love biting the decoy, biting the bite sleeve more than anything in the world. And we increase that desire by putting those barriers, building the frustration, and then rewarding the frustration. Now, some dogs, and this goes back, so Think about this. This goes back to what we were talking about in the very beginning for those of you that have been here the whole time when we were talking about classical conditioning and operant conditioning. Classical conditioning is outside of the dog's control, but it influences their behavior. Operant conditioning is the dog perceives it as within their control. Thank you, Arm & Hammer. I appreciate that. So if we go back to the dog being on the leash, and the dog starts to bark when they see the decoy come out, and we teach them that pattern. So decoy comes out, oh, here's the toy, here's the tug, whatever. I start to move in a way that kicks in that prey drive, that play drive. The dog wants to bite, so we're utilizing those drives as well. And every time the dog barks, we move, we react to that bark. So the dog's like, whoa, I have an impact. So now the barking and me reacting, that's operant conditioning. The dog is learning that their bark controls me as long as my timing is correct. But the dog doesn't control that. If I come out and show the tug toy and the dog gets excited, I could walk away. I could do that. I could come out and be like, here's a toy, and I walk away. And if I do that every day, I put the dog on the back tie, I show up, I go, here's the toy, and I walk away. And I do that over and over and over again. That will decondition the dog, or uncondition the dog rather, from being classically conditioned to me showing up with the toy, them getting excited and me rewarding them. I changed the pattern, and that would change the dog's reactivity. Of course, depending on the dog. Some dogs, it might be more quickly. Some dogs, and this is something that's important too, this is what they call an extinction burst, where the dog will get worse before it gets better. The dog will go crazier, lack of a better word, to get what they want before they go, it's not going to work. They amp it up. So to go back to the question with the dog, I always focus on obedience. Now, obedience often fixes behavioral issues. When we have behavioral issues with our dogs, a lot of people that don't know too much about the dog training world, if they're dealing with something that involves a behavioral issue, they'll say, we need a behavioralist. If they want to teach their dog something, they go, we need a dog trainer. But a good dog trainer can fix most behavioral issues, because it's really about getting the dog to do what we prefer instead of getting them to do what we wouldn't. So if I have a dog, this goes back to environmental difficulty assessment. I have my dog on leash. Number one, I have to get my dog to be nice on leash, and I have to be able to do that in a neutral environment. As my dog proves proficiency, then I'm going to start increasing the difficulty of the environment. If other dogs in the environment are considered the most difficult level, for me, that would be a level 5. I do 0 to 5. If I consider that a level 5 for the dog, I want to make sure I can effectively navigate having my dog perform on a loose leash the way that I want on a level 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 until I get to 5. And even in that situation, simply by increasing the distance of whatever is triggering the dog to be reactive is going to make it easier. And over time, we get it closer and closer. This takes more time when we're working with our dog, but it increases the likelihood of the dog being successful at what we're trying to get them to do. So that's how I would do it. And again, that's if we're simplifying it. If we want to break it down, if I had a brand, let's say I never worked with the dog at all, first I would do the engagement. I want the dog to know certain sounds mean I'm going to give them a reward. And then let's think, why do we use markers? So again, markers are the sounds that predict one of the 4 quadrants of operant conditioning. If I say no and the dog gets a correction, that's a marker. If I say yes and I give the dog a reward, that's a marker. We use markers for 2 main reasons. 1, to bridge the gap between the behavior and the consequence. And number 2, to pinpoint fine details within our training. So the dog looking at me or the dog looking at the source, I can pinpoint these little details so the dog really knows. When we were talking about scent detection earlier, I can get the dog to understand it's looking at the odor and not looking at me is what I'm trying to reward. So that's the first thing I would do. I would teach the dog how to follow the food lure. Now, often people will say my dog is not food motivated. And then I say if you make your dog work for all your food, which I've recently switched to if you make your dog play for all your food, then they will have food drive. Every dog has food drive. And I actually watched a video recently because I'm always studying other dog trainers. And he has a pretty small channel right now, but I have a feeling his channel is going to continue to grow. It's called Yorkshire Canine Academy. I watched 2 of his videos. And one of his videos, and I like this technique, I thought it was very interesting. For a dog that doesn't want to work for food, he used the example of simply doing certain things that make it slightly more difficult, but very similar to what the dog was initially doing. And so the example he had, let's say your dog eats out of a bowl and your dog's not willing to work for food. He's like, okay, put it in a bowl, but make it to where there's less in the bowl and you do it a few times frequently throughout the day. So the dog's in a sense having to work by doing it more. Then he's like, use a slow feeder where the dog has to navigate through the slow feeder. Then maybe put the next time the dog food bowl in a box. Now the dog has to go into a box to get the food. And so by slightly making it more difficult, increases the dog's ability to be able to work for the food, even though it's not that much based on what they were doing. So we're gradually making the dog work a little bit harder to get the reward, and then it's going to make it easier to incorporate. Now, I haven't personally put that into practice, but understanding dog training, that makes a lot of sense to me, and I thought that was pretty cool. So then I would do the leash pressure. Now, when I teach leash pressure, this is another thing. It's not leash force, right? We're not forcing the dog, whereas we can, but when we're first teaching leash pressure, it's a cue. And this is why when I teach leash pressure, I like for the dog to understand the concept of a food lure before teaching leash pressure. The way leash pressure was traditionally taught is the trainer would put the pressure on, dog feels the pressure, classical opposition reflex kicks in, dog resists, handler or trainer continues to pull until eventually the dog moves with the pressure, they turn off the pressure, and they reward the dog. That's mildly stressful because when we're using negative reinforcement, two rules or two things must take place in order for it to work. So think about the seatbelt analogy. A lot of cars, that beeping stops after like 10 seconds. And there's a good majority of the population who's probably like, I'll just wait for the beeping to stop. So for those people, it doesn't work. But if the beeping continues and it doesn't turn off, it goes indefinitely until you buckle the seatbelt, that's going to work more. But let's say you buckle the seatbelt and the beeping continues. What's the point of buckling the seatbelt then? I mean, for safety, I always buckle it regardless. But the point is, once the pressure is turned on, it cannot be turned off until the subject complies. And the moment the subject complies, it has to instantly be turned off in order for it to work. So when we put leash pressure on a brand new dog that's never experienced it before, we are presenting the dog with a problem. And if we don't give the dog the solution, we're essentially saying, good luck, figure out the solution on your own. Some dogs figure it out quickly, but others might go through more things, create more stress. They pull harder. Some dogs might flop on the ground. Some might try to bite the leash. They're trying different things to get this pressure to go away. And of course, that can be stressful. So instead of that, I just give the dog the answer. Beeping goes off, buckle your seatbelt. Click, see, easy. So I give the answer to the dog, and I do that with the food lure. So if I lift up on the leash and the dog feels a little bit of pressure, the dog's like, what's that? Then I take the food lure, I lift the food lure up, the dog sits, I turn off the pressure. So it becomes a pattern the dog can recognize. It becomes a cue in which the dog knows how to respond to that cue. So now I can guide the dog wherever I want with the leash. It's an additional way to communicate what I want with the dog. After I do that, then I teach the behavior of heel. Then I start making it more difficult. Now, this is a very simple exercise to do. And those of you that are listening, when you start to see people with their dogs out in public, this thing that so many people do, I'm looking for something that I can use as a leash. I should have a leash on me when I do this, but I got a cord. So I'll use this as an example. How many times you see someone where they have their dog and they have the leash just like this, from their hand to the dog's neck, and it's super tight. And if you were to ask them why is the leash tight? Well, because I want to keep my dog in the heel position. Yes, that could keep the dog in that position, but the moment you loosen the leash, the moment they let go of that slack, off the dog goes. Because if the dog feels constant tension, the moment that tension is turned off, whoop, they're going to go in the direction in which they're trying to go. So yeah, maybe it can get the dog to stay there, but you have to keep the leash tight the whole time. A super, super easy fix that you can do with just about any dog to fix that. And that's another thing with a dog that's being reactive. Sometimes if it's too difficult, I may not say I want you in perfect heel position. I may just tell the dog, I don't want you to pull on the leash. That's a much easier win than having the dog maintain a perfect heel position or a focused heel looking up at me. So what I do to do this, and it's very, very simple, dog goes to pull. Once the leash gets tight, I pull the dog back to where I want them, and then the leash instantly goes loose. The dog goes ahead of me again. I pull the dog back. Leash goes loose. I may have to do this sequence 30, 40, 50 times. And I just keep doing it over and over again. And what's going to end up happening, this goes back, we don't know how many reps it's going to take, but I can pretty much guarantee with 99.9999999% of the dogs out there, eventually you're going to pull them back, you're going to go loose, and the dog is going to maintain that position. They're not going to go forward anymore because going forward never gave them something of value. Going forward only caused them to come back anyways. And then if they maintain the position, the leash is nice. It's nice and loose. I don't feel the tension on my collar. And they maintain the position very, very easily. People have a hard time when they pull the dog back, they have a hard time going loose. Because when they pull the dog back, they can feel the dog is already trying to pull forward. So really, it's like you pull the dog back and you have to go loose very, very quickly and you have to be ready. The dog's going to jump forward again. But we have to neutralize the situation so the dog knows that's the most comfortable position to maintain. This is the same when I'm teaching a dog not to jump up on the sofa. If I pull a dog off, often I can tell if the dog wants to jump right back up. And if I keep the pressure and I don't allow the dog to jump back up, then I never concluded the event prior to that one. And that's what I like to call a reinforcement event. So I'm reinforcing the act of the dog coming off the sofa. If I don't turn off the pressure, I didn't conclude that reinforcement event. I have to turn it off. I have to let the dog make the mistake again, and then I have to do another rep. And when I do this, and your timing is correct, dogs learn very, very quickly. Okay. Okay, sorry. Some of these are just like saying thanks and saying hi and stuff like that. My 8-month-old golden doodle uses her mouth. How do I correct that? Okay, so like a playful thing. She is trained in obedience on and off leash, training her to be a therapy dog, but can't figure out how to correct mouthing. So mouthing, and again, this is why I'm really big on teaching people the science so we know what we're doing, because one technique for one dog may not work on another dog. A really good one to start with when it comes to mouthing, especially with a dog that is very friendly, very social, is implementing negative punishment. Now remember, negative punishment is taking something of value away to prevent the repeat of the behavior. I usually use a crate for this, and I've had people tell me, well, I don't want to make the crate a bad thing. You don't have to. This is why I'm so big on not making things personal. It's just the world that the dog lives in, and they create the consequences. It has nothing to do with you. You're just the element within the dog's world, and you are responding according to the rules that you decide. So this is how I do it when I have a dog that mouths. Very friendly dog, not being aggressive. It just likes to mouth. That's how dogs communicate quite often. So let's say I'm petting the dog, I'm giving the dog some love, and the dog goes and mouths at my hand. The moment the dog mouths at my hand, I go, you want to go to your crate? Okay, let's go to the crate. Here we go. And I put the dog in the crate, and I do it just like that. So it doesn't make the crate a bad thing, but I am using negative punishment by removing the petting, removing the affection that I was giving the dog, and temporarily removing the freedom by putting them in the crate. Now, where we make it bad and where we can make the crate a bad thing is if the dog goes to mouth at us and we go, stop it! How many times you're going to the crate? Now, if we do that, yeah, and we might stress the dog out. The dog's going to be more cautious around us. They're going to be nervous around us. And it has all these negative side effects. We don't want to do that. But again, if we go, oh, you want to go to the crate? Yay! Off we go to the crate. The dog's going to be like, well, I'll be darned. I think that happened when I went to mouth at his hand or her hand. And then the dog is probably going to do it again. They usually do it a couple times if your timing is right, because they're trying to make sure that that's the connection. And then 2, 3, 4 more times the dog does, the dog goes, okay, mouthing at your hand, licking at your hand, ends the game. I don't like that. I can prevent that by removing that behavior from my repertoire. Now, I don't randomly have to go to the kennel. So that's an example of negative punishment. Works very, very well and has almost no negative side effects. At least I haven't had any negative side effects. I say almost because I haven't worked with every single dog on the planet. So But most dogs, that's going to work. Now, if that doesn't work, then you can decide if you want to utilize one of the other 4 quadrants. So in that one, we're using, if I just pick the dog up and put him in the crate, then I'm just making them go in there. If I'm using a leash cue, then I would be using negative reinforcement to get the dog in the crate, and then negative punishment. So that would be 2 out of the 4 quadrants. I could also use negative reinforcement. This is a great option for self-reinforcing behavior. So self-reinforcing behavior is anytime a dog is doing a behavior that is self-reinforcing, where the dog enjoys the behavior, the act of doing it feels good. It feels good to dig. It feels good to bark at the squirrel. These are self-reinforcing behaviors. It's nice to mouth at people. That feels good. So self-reinforcing. Anytime a dog is doing a self-reinforcing behavior, a really great option is redirecting to the preferred behavior. Now, we have to be careful with this, because if we redirect the dog to the preferred behavior and we reward them too quickly, we actually increase the likelihood of the dog doing the undesired behavior. This goes back to teachable moments. When I'm doing a teachable moment, I'm reacting to a dog. I'm not punishing them. I'm showing them the preferred behavior. I don't reward because I don't want the dog to re-trigger that same sequence. So a dog goes to mouth at my hand. I go, wrong. I lift the leash up. I make the dog sit. I turn off the pressure. Good dog. I make them hold it for 5 seconds. Break. I release the dog. I go back to petting. Dog does it again. I stop it again. Now, this is effective. Even though we're rewarding the dog shortly after, I'm not giving the dog a different reward than what they were already getting. So if they don't mouth at me, they get more pets. If they mouth at me, we're temporarily stopping that. We're making the dog perform a behavior, and then we can go back to the reward. That's another way in which we can redirect or change what the dog is doing to stop an unwanted behavior. So we covered 3 out of the 4. The last one is a correction. That works as well. Again, if correction's not your cup of tea, don't do it. But doing a leash pop with this works very well. Now, when we do a leash pop, again, it's not personal. And I have a whole section on corrections in the course. The biggest mistake most people make with corrections is they're inconsistent and they make it personal, or they didn't teach the dog the rules in the very beginning. So by using negative reinforcement initially really helps when we add the corrections. This is how I would add a correction if I was doing a leash pop. There's another great tool, which I'm going to talk about, is the tone. So I even have a remote collar here. The tone that these collars provide that we can utilize to stop undesired behaviors without correcting the dog. I've been practicing this with all my dogs. I've been having other dog trainers that I know utilize it, and it has been an absolute game changer. I cannot believe that I went 12 years without really using the tone on these collars. It is amazing. And I'll talk about that a little bit more and how we can use it for different things like what we're going over right now. But let's say I'm doing a leash pop. So a leash pop for me, next time I'll make sure I have a leash, but a leash pop, if this is the dog and this is my hand, a big mistake people make is when they go to pop, they grab it and then they pull. So it's not really a pop. A leash pop is we pop and then the hand goes back to the starting position. So the starting position and the end position is the same spot. It's boop, just like that. That's a leash pop. So that's giving the dog a correction. And it's good to practice this on either a friend, a spouse, or a chair or something like that so you can get good. Yeah, and that's e-collar technology. That's just one of the models, right? So we have different models. And I'll talk about that. So getting good at that. So then the dog goes to mouth. I would go, no. I do a little leash pop. Dog stops. I go, good. Nice job. Dog goes to bite again. No. I do a little leash pop. Dog stops. Very nice. And it looks just like that. So the dog doesn't see it as this horrible thing. The analogy that I use in my video on the course is a jujitsu analogy. And whether or not you practice jujitsu, you'll understand this. So I train under one of the best jujitsu practitioners in the world, Lucas Barbosa. Absolute monster. His nickname is the Hulk. Super nice guy. When I spar with him, I pretty much have no chance of beating him. If I get insanely, insanely lucky, 1 out of 1,000,000, I might, but not going to happen. So he's really, really good. He's been doing it for 20 plus years or whatever it is. And when I roll with him, if he puts me in an arm bar, and most people know what an arm bar is. You've seen if you watched UFC. If he puts me in an arm bar, that is positive punishment. It's positive punishment, but I don't perceive it as I'm being punished. It's making me better. It's making me a better jiu-jitsu practitioner. My defense for the arm bar gets better. If I learn, if he gets in this position and I extend my arm, he's going to put me in an arm bar. Okay, next time I'm not going to extend my arm, and that's going to prevent the arm bar from being placed on me. And then if he gets the arm bar, we do the typical jiu-jitsu. Everyone does that, and we go back into sparring. But if the exact same thing happened to me, but he was yelling at me and he was mad at me, now I'm going to avoid him. I'm not going to want to be around him. I'm definitely not going to go to his school to learn jiu-jitsu. So it's not necessarily the correction that has negative consequences. It's the attitude behind the correction is where most people make the biggest mistakes. So I hope that answers the question with the mouthing. Okay. Do you have a take on apprenticeships? I'm looking for a mentor because of where I live. Yeah. So I apprentice a lot of dog trainers. So ones that are learning how to be dog trainers, ones that are currently training as a professional. Just reach out to me on my email, nateschoemer@gmail.com, and I'll tell you how I do that with my, again, as I don't have any in person right now. I'm in the middle of a move. So I'm currently in Eugene, Oregon, and we've been trying to sell the house. The market's not that great, but once we sell, we have family in Indiana. So if anyone here is in Indiana, I will be moving most likely to Carmel. Once we get set up in Carmel, one of the plans is to have a facility where I'm going to have students and apprentices come in and work directly with me. But the mentoring that I do right now it's all virtual, it's phone calls. And I do a lot of that, again, because I love this stuff. I love talking to dog trainers. And a lot of times too, when I'm talking to dog trainers, I sometimes pick up things that I never did before. I'll give you a quick example. And I've talked about this. Oh, he just popped up, 0 to Hero Dog Training. I'm just about ready to mention you. So 0 to Hero Austin, 0 to Hero Dog Training, amazing dog trainer. I mean, when he started sending me videos, I was blown away by the skill that he was presenting in the videos of him working with his dog. And one of the things when you're working with dogs and you are starting a dog training business, a lot of times we operate out of our homes, especially in the very beginning. We don't have a facility. A lot of dog trainers work this way. And because of that, you can't have 10 dogs in your house barking all the time. Your neighbors are not going to be happy. You're going to get shut down. So keeping them quiet is very important. And I was talking to Austin, and he was telling me one of his main techniques that he uses to prevent dogs from barking in the crate is he does a crate stay with the crate door open. That's the first thing he does. He just does a crate stay with them. And it's something I never thought about before, just doing a crate stay. And it's like, that makes perfect sense because we're not putting the dog in this enclosed environment. We're simply working a stay. It gets the dog more relaxed. And then after we do that, shutting the door, it becomes much easier based on what he was telling me. I haven't even personally tried it yet, but it makes perfect sense. And it's like, awesome. I learned something from talking to someone that I'm mentoring, and he's a really, really phenomenal dog trainer. So thanks for joining us, Austin. Okay. This is a great investment. Oh, thanks, Tim. I appreciate that. Awesome course. Probably best deal out there. I really do appreciate that. So those of you that have gotten the course and you've gotten value from it, thank you so much. It really means a lot. And if you do have a spare moment, if you have the course and you've been enjoying the course, a review would be very much appreciated. How does this course align with what you taught in your manual? Okay, interesting bringing up the manual. And I think he already had to leave. Now, the manual, I just want to be clear. I called it a manual for a reason. So I've looked and I have a few 1, 2, and 3 star reviews on it. And it's like, it's short. There's not that much information, and that's why it's boring was another one. It's a manual. So I didn't write it for it to be a novel. It was meant to be just a quick guide, like this is the basics, this is quadrants, this is classical conditioning, this is how we communicate with the dog. It's a short read, takes like an hour and a half if you're a fast reader. 2 hours. It's not a very long read. And I initially wrote it for my clients because I believe in order for a dog trainer to be successful, it is based on how long or how short the student needs the trainer. If somebody hires me and I can solve their problems on a phone call, I consider that a win, even if they don't pay me. I don't want someone to need me for 6 months. I don't want someone to need, and now of course if they're doing sport work or they're becoming a professional trainer, of course depending on what their goals are is going to change how long it is, but the less time that they need me in order to reach the level of success that they desire is a direct reflection of my skill as a teacher. And because of that, I realized when I was doing a lot of my sessions, they would understand the concepts and they would know how to do it when I would be with them. But the moment they would be on their own, they would forget what I taught them. They'd be like, what is step one? How do I do this? What is step two? So I wrote the manual and I started making videos as an additional support after someone did the lesson. And I would always give my manual to my clients that worked with me in person in order to increase the likelihood of success. And that's how we measure value. So that's why I wrote the manual. And then I was like, why not put it on Amazon? So if you haven't bought the manual and you're considering it, it has a lot of the stuff that's in my videos. It almost sounds like how I talk because how I wrote it. When I wrote it, there was no ChatGPT. And it's just designed to be a manual. So it's not a super exciting read, but the course does align with a lot of that. So let me cover A to Z rapidly. I've kind of been bouncing around a lot. So the way the course is structured, and you can see it on the website. So if you go to Sit, Stay, Learn, you go to courses and you click on mine, you can see all the videos. There's roughly 70 videos in the course. And it's a lot. Now there's certain ones you can skip that you may not need, but by practicing all of these, it's going to make you a much, much better handler trainer. So again, part one covers the basics as far as what the course is, common mistakes. It's mostly just me talking. Part two is where I go over food handling exercises. So I have the introduction to food handling, how to properly handle food, the hand touch, and then different stationary exercises, backwards follow, lateral movements. Now this is going to make you effective when it comes to getting the dog to move, but it's mostly about developing the food handling skills, which plays a big part. Introducing the reward event. So I also, in the course, I talk about and I explain the 3 main events to dog training: the reward event, the reinforcement. So you can buy it on Sit, Stay, Learn. So I'll actually put the link in the comments right now. So you can get it right there. If you use the coupon code, I believe this is it. So I just added that as well. It's Schoemer, but instead of an R at the end, it's a 1. So I believe that gives you, I think, 40 or 50% off, something like that. You have to plug it in to see. And again, they have a 30-day money-back guarantee. So I go over the 3 main events, which is the reward event, reinforcement event, and the correction event. If you can understand these 3 events, and you can understand when to implement them, when to end them, and the exceptions to the rule, you'll be amazed at how much easier dog training will become and how much faster your dog will learn. So I cover that in the course as well. Part 4 is almost all luring. So there's a lot of luring. So luring and positional work. We do forward luring. I cover the reinforcement event, around, spin. So like spin, for example. Most dogs may not need to spin. You go, okay, dog doesn't really need to spin. Why do you do the spin? I like to do the spin because it really develops the dog's rear end awareness. And that rear end awareness plays a really big part in getting the dog to flip into the heel position. So if we think about the dog being in the sit front, so the sit front is the dog directly in front of you looking up at you, and having that dog flip to where they're now in the heel position facing the same direction as you, that's a 180. That's all that is. It's half a spin. So if I can get my dog to understand the mechanics of a spin, those mechanics transfer from when the dog goes into the sit front position into the heel position. And the more our dog understands these movements, the more these communication skills transfer into all aspects of the dog's life when we're taking our dogs places.
So, I mean, if you have a dog that just sits at the fireplace all day, a lot of these skills may not be necessary, but it still enhances the relationship. And one of the things that I agree with Cesar Millan on is if we want a balanced dog, we have to provide mental stimulation, physical stimulation, and plenty of affection. If we do those things, we usually can have a pretty stable dog. Of course, genetics plays a big role. So this is all luring. It's a lot of different luring exercises. So for example, I have the sit front to the heel, and I have the flip finish, the around finish, sit front to center, 3 different versions, heel to sit front, heel to center, 3 different versions, so different ways to get the dog to understand how to navigate around you. And if you can get a dog to do all these, you will be amazed at how well your communication with your dog becomes and how it enhances the relationship. Dogs usually love this. Not all dogs, again, depends on the dog. Part 5 is going to be introduction to movement. So now we're moving the dog in the center position. We're moving the dog in the sit front, in the heel position, left and right heel position. So now we're adding movement to all this. Could you make a video on how to teach the... Yes, we are going to do that, the buzz. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more here. I'll demonstrate in the video, but I can explain basically what I've been doing with it. And I've been trying different things. And here's another thing. So I was talking to Nathan. He was commenting on the video. So he's one of the dog trainers that I mentor. And we were talking for about an hour and a half the other day. Gosh darn it, I just forgot where I was going with that. Something with the tone. Oh yeah, I remember. So, and I was telling him one of the things that you can't be afraid of, and this is again why we study and understand the science of dog training. When I hear people say like, I don't care about the science, it's like, what? The science is like the most important part. If you understand the science, you should be comfortable with trying different things, experimenting, of course, in a safe and humane way, but I'm always experimenting different training techniques to see how it works with the dog. Like, I never saw a video on how to use the tone. You almost can't find anything on it. Maybe someone out there uses it as a recall or something like that. But the way that I'm using it, I haven't seen a video on it. And it works incredibly well, but I had to be comfortable trying it. And when we understand how dogs learn and how they process information, and when we can understand and read a dog's body language, then it makes it much easier and increases our confidence to try things. And so it's always good to try things, but of course, be smart and be safe. So we have the movement work, so how the dog moves around us, walking backwards, the mechanics that we want the dog to have, center position, forward movement, center position turns, walking backwards in center position, left and right heel forward movement. So I demonstrate all this. Excuse me. Part 6, getting started with leash pressure. So I introduce leash pressure. I also introduce how I teach what I like to call power steering. That's a term I picked up from my buddy Forrest Mickey, great trainer. He has a few courses on Learburg Online University. Those dog trainers out there that are listening, I would definitely recommend his courses, and Michael Ellis and Nino from STS Canine. I haven't done Ivan's yet. It's on my list. But he calls it power steering. And so I like that term. And what I do, and this is something I was talking about again the other day with Nathan, if I have a dog, so if I have my hand and I have my food in my hand, if the dog brings their nose inside of the food, most dogs, if they're not trained, if I go to turn my hand, instead of the dog turning with the hand, that would be power steering. Without any training, the dog usually will try to go around this way. So you rotate the hand and the dog turns and goes to the other side trying to find out how to get the food. We have to teach them when I rotate the hand, I actually want you to pivot your whole body. And one of the ways that I like to do that is, so if you think, I got my hand like this, right? I have the dog in front. If I had a string that was hanging from my hand straight down to the floor, that would maintain the same position. And all I do is I place it in between my legs. So I have it in between my legs up against my body. So my legs and my body create a barrier. And then I start to turn. Now my hand stays in the same position because, again, think of that string hanging, and I'm basically walking around it. And by having my legs blocking the sides, it teaches the dog to pivot. Now this becomes power steering. So then when I have my dog next to me, I don't have to do a large arching motion to get the dog to turn their head and swing their butt. I simply pivot, I turn my hand, and that gets the whole dog to pivot their body. So these other mechanics that help develop our communication with the dog is taught in this course. And I really wanted this to be a good course too. I was like, if I'm going to make a course, I'm going to make it as good as possible. So part 6, so leash pressure, and then a lot of techniques incorporating the leash pressure in with the training. And then part 7 is where we start adding the verbal command. So that's another common question in a lot of my videos. And that's the thing about YouTube too. It's like, and I've talked to other YouTubers about this. When we have a video on, let's say, one specific thing and we're using certain tools, then people ask about those tools. It's like, I heard you saying yes, I heard you saying free. What does that mean? You didn't explain it in the video. It's like, oh, well, it was explained in another video. And so one of the common questions that's often asked is like, oh, when do you start adding the command? The way that I add commands, and I don't add commands before this, is when I can get the dog to perform the behavior exactly the way that I want with the physical cue. Once I do that, yeah, email address is just my name at gmail.com. So Nate Schoemer at gmail.com. So once I can get the dog to perform the command every single time on the physical cue, then I add the verbal. And it's the way that I like. So I might have a dog performing something, but maybe it's not as fast as I would like it to be. Maybe it's not as sharp or precise as I would like it to be. So then I continue to develop the physical cue. Now let's say I have the dog in the sit front, and when I present the physical cue, boom, the dog flies perfectly into the heel position. Now I'm going to add the command. And the command comes before the physical cue. It has to be a pattern that the dog can recognize. Oh, you say heel, then you guide me into the heel position. After enough of those, we say heel, dog goes, I know the answer. And this is why I often say that I like to look at commands as questions. If you think about it this way, it'll make more sense when you're communicating with your dog. And really, our verbals, let's simplify it even more. Our verbals are just a way of telling our dog what we're about to do. That's it. So think about it. When I say yes, I'm telling the dog I'm going to give him a treat, but I'm doing it in one word. So I'm saying, hey, Fido, I'm going to give you a treat right now. But I do that in one word. Yes. And the dog figures that out. Hey, Fido, you're going to get a correction right now. But instead of doing that, I say no. Hey, Fido, I'm going to make you go into a sit position right now. But instead of saying all that, I say sit. So think about it. Your verbals are telling your dog what you're about to do. And once your dog recognizes those patterns, it will change their behavior. So either they will perform certain behaviors, or if you're using something like markers, it'll have a different reaction based on what it predicts. So we know if a dog's classically conditioned to a word that predicts food, often they salivate, they open their mouth, they lick their lips in anticipation of the reward. But we also see a change of behavior when a dog is classically, thanks Fly Girl, I appreciate that. When we have a dog that's classically conditioned to a word that predicts a correction. And this is where a lot of people make mistakes. Yeah, and thanks, Jimmy. I appreciate that. Yeah, so, and our physical cue, to add to that, the command is a question. The physical cue is the answer to the question. So if I tell my dog, hey, Fido, do you know what to do when I say sit? And Fido goes, no, I have no idea what to do when you make that noise. And then I go here, and I show him what I want him to do. And then once he does it, I pay him. So, hey, what's 2 plus 2? It's 4. Here's a reward. What's 2 plus 2? It's 4. Here's a reward. What's 2 plus 2? Oh, the dog just told me it's 4. Here's your reward. And then, of course, at that point, we start spacing out the reward. And that's another common question. When do I know how to start spacing out the reward? And they've done a lot of different studies on different frequencies and deliveries of rewards and how it increases and changes motivation. And the best one is the one that replicates the slot machine, completely random. And also the reward itself not always being the same thing. Our dogs can learn patterns, and that's the thing with us as humans. We're very systematic. We're very much driven by patterns. And no matter how hard you try to not pattern train, all of us do pattern training in some way or another. And you'll figure out, if you train a lot of dogs, you'll figure out your own patterns. So one of my big ones, I do it so much and I don't even realize I'm doing it until I start to see the dog change their behavior. So I'll be doing loose leash walking with my dog. And yeah, spacing rewards definitely important. So so I'll be doing loose leash walking, and I always like to teach the dog the automatic sit when halted. And I do that by I stop, I make the dog sit, good dog, simple enough. Once I put the dog in a sit, I often keep them in a sit stay, and I step out and in front of them. And then when I step out in front of them, I often tell them down. So the sequence that I do is I stop, I have them sit, I walk out in front of them, I tell them down. And I do it so much. The name of the trainers, so it was Michael Ellis. Michael Ellis, like, all-time favorite for me. I talked to him once on the phone, and it was like a celebrity moment for me. Michael Ellis is awesome. I think he's the GOAT of teaching dog training. And then Forrest Mickey. Forrest Mickey is really, really exceptional at focused heel work. The courses that he has on Learberg Online University is the Healer's Toolbox. So I've done those courses, really phenomenal courses. The other one is Nino from STS Canine. Nino is awesome. I even did a lesson with him. Like, I was his student and I did a lesson with him. He's a really great guy. Really, as far as performance goes, he's one of the best performers that I've seen. Like, the way he handles dogs is second to none. He is so good at handling dogs. It's very impressive. Teaching, Michael Ellis is one of the best teachers. The way he talks, he's very articulate, he's very clear, he knows the subject so incredibly well. Ivan Balabanov is another good one, but I haven't done his course yet. So, but I know a lot of trainers that have, and they think it's really great. Bart Bellin also is widely recognized as one of the best teachers out there for dog trainers. I haven't done his course either. He's known for Neat Po, but a lot of my friends have done that. Well, thanks. I appreciate that, Arm & Hammer. Okay, so let's go to the next one. And yeah, it aligns pretty well with the manual. How can I work on getting my German Shepherd's attention when in the ring for obedience trials? He's very focused on all around. Okay, so this is a good one. I don't know if Denise, if you're still on here, but this goes back to the reward schedule. And sorry, I almost forgot I was talking about that. Like, they did different studies, for example, where they even just rotated the rewards with the subject. And so what you end up seeing, so let's say I'm doing a recall with a dog. I call the dog to me, I reward the dog. I call the dog to me, I don't reward the dog. I call the dog to me, I reward the dog. If I go back and forth between reward and non-reward, even if I do reward, reward, no reward, no reward, 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 no reward, no reward, the dog will figure out that pattern and it'll change their behavior on the non-reward ones. And so this often happens with dogs that compete, that go to trial. They quickly learn that trial is a no reward day. And so they usually don't perform as well. And this is why when we are working with dogs and we are trying to get them to compete, so my best frame of reference for trial type work is when I was teaching at the Tom Rose School. So when I was teaching at the Tom Rose School, I was even more obsessed with dog training than I am now, if you can believe that. And the day would be done and other instructors would go home, they had families or whatever, and I would stay at the training building. Anyone who was a student at that time when I was an instructor can vouch for it. But I would stay there usually till 10 o'clock at night, and I would work with the students there. And when the dogs were getting ready for test day, because the way that we would test them is the same that they would do at a trial. We set up ring gates. They couldn't use treats. They couldn't use rewards. They couldn't use any sort of corrections. They could only give commands. They couldn't double command, no saying down and pointing. Like, it was tested exactly the same way that an actual trial would be tested. And we did AKC Novice, Open, Utility, and we did Schutzen 1 or IGP 1 and IGP 3 obedience routine, which those are very similar. There's just a couple things that are different, like the retrieve and then running, stand in motion. So, but for the most part, it's very similar. And now, if a student would only put their dog through the routine in the trial sort of setup, the dogs would become what is known as trial smart. The dog goes out, they're like, oh, ring gates, some random person, well, not random in this case because they knew us. Yeah, Ivan Balabanov, he's a genius in the dog training world. So they see the ring gates, they see the instructor with the clipboard, they see the students all lined up on the outside, which would replicate an audience at a trial, and dog sees all that and goes, I don't get rewarded in this situation, and I don't get corrected in this situation. So what I would tell my students, because they were able to test their requirements once a week, during the nights when they were prepping or they were getting ready, and when I would be there, we would set it up as if we were getting ready for them to test. We'd put the ring gates up and I would walk them through the routine. And during that routine, I would tell them, if you need to correct your dog, give your dog a correction. If you need to reward your dog, if it's something really good, reward the dog randomly. So then the dog gets used to seeing this situation and they don't instantly think this is a non-reward situation, a non-correction situation, which greatly affects their performance. They have to believe. So if the dog doesn't believe there's a possibility that they can get a reward, if the dog doesn't believe there's a possibility that they can get a correction for non-compliancy, we don't get the reliability. So we have to trick the dog into thinking that they can get a reward or a correction. This is why with like the sport of French ring competitors, they're allowed. So like one of the disadvantages that they have is the dog has to be naked. So if you watch a French ring trial, all the dogs that are competing naked, no collar, nothing. They can't even wear a flat collar, or like an IGP, they can wear a fur saver, which is very similar to a choke chain. It's a little different, but the mechanics are similar. So you can teach a dog that the fur saver is a correctional collar. So then when the dog has it on, they think, oh, you can correct me even if you can't. But one of the benefits that they have in French ring is they can compete with their training vest on. It's like dogs become classically conditioned to the training vest as well. When I grab my training vest and I put that vest on, my dogs start going nuts, because they know that that training vest, I classically condition them that when I bring that training vest out, we are training. And my dogs love to train. Training material for service dogs, that one video, but all this obedience definitely transfers over to service dog training. And I can't recall the name of the book. Here, I'll post a link real quick. So one of my friends, Jennifer, she wrote this book and I read it. It's a good book. It's a good foundational book on service dog training. So I'm going to post this in the chat section if it'll let me. You know, I don't think, oh, there it goes. No, maybe it's not letting me post the link. Oh, too many characters or something. Anyway, it's called Service Dog Training Guide, a step-by-step training program for you and your dog by Jennifer Hack. So I'll actually just copy that so you can. There we go. Let me post that. Okay. So that's a good one for service dog training. But a lot of this, again, this is why I teach the science. If you understand the science, you can figure out how to problem solve and teach your dog certain behaviors that are often utilized in service dog work. So a big one is the retrieve. I have videos on teaching the retrieve. So if you know how to teach a retrieve, you can teach a retrieve for a service dog. Here's another one, counterbalance or counter support. Of course, you need a strong dog that can do this, but counterbalance or counter support is the opposite of a dog going with pressure, right? So when I'm teaching a dog to go with the pressure, if I'm doing leash pressure work, or I also teach dogs when I touch their shoulder blades that I want them to go into a down. And I don't do that by pushing the dog hard to a down. I apply a little bit of pressure on their shoulder and then I cue them into the down. And I do that enough. So pressure means I'm going to cue you into the down with the food lure. And after enough of those, I just touch their shoulder blades and they lay down. Well, counterbalance or counter support is the opposite of that. So how would I teach that? Well, I would reward the resisting behavior, which is natural in the very beginning. So I apply a little bit of pressure on the dog resists. Yes, I reward the dog. I apply a little bit of pressure, the dog resists. Yes, I reward the dog. So now the dog starts to understand. And someone's asking right now about the course from Nino. I personally got a lot out of it. I haven't completed it yet. I did the MVP program. It's a very, very long course. There is a lot of information on it. And like I said, when it comes to the handling of a dog, Nino is easily one of the best. The way he handles and manipulates and moves, like it's a work of art. The guy is incredibly talented. Now, what I had to do on a lot of the videos was I had to, like, a lot of them he has slow motion, but I would have to play it again in slow motion. I would look at it. I would figure out the mechanics, how he was moving. I would practice it with my dog. I'd go back to the video. So I did a lot of that to figure the little, because When it comes to, so like if you watch him move, he can explain basically what he's doing, but there's so many little tiny details that in order for me to get my dogs to perform in a similar fashion to his, I had to really watch it and pick out the small details. And it takes extra time, but those are things like if he was explaining every little single tiny detail, the videos would be significantly longer, and that's even really hard to point out. An example I like to use is teaching someone how to ride a bike. You can explain the mechanics. You get on the bike, you got to maintain balance, you pedal the pedals, and there you go. But until you get on a bike and ride it, you have to feel it out. And it's the same thing with working with dogs. But it's a great course. I think it was worth it. I've gotten a lot out of it, and I'm still not done with the course yet. Okay, so where are we? Yeah, and I hope that answers, so Denise, I hope that answers the question about getting your dog's attention for the ring. You have to set it up, you have to make sure your dog believes it, that either you practice it or it's much more difficult if you don't have the environment to practice it. And that was one of the benefits that we had at the school. Even with something that I learned that was really cool, one of the guys that I trained with for French ring, remember how I said the dogs have to be naked for the trial? And so before he was getting ready to compete, excuse me, I was one of his decoys, but he taught me how to decoy. So he decoyed any trial. The guy's amazing. Juan Mendoza. So he has a business out in California. Anyways, so we're doing a routine and he's getting ready for the trial. So his dog's naked, but he's still correcting his dog. And you might be thinking, well, how is he correcting his dog? Well, he wasn't kicking or hitting his dog or anything crazy like that. Is he kept the prong collar inside of his vest. So he had the prong collar with the leash inside of his vest. And if his dog did something, then that warranted a correction. The moment his dog did it, he went, no. He grabbed the collar, put it on, gave the dog the correction, took the collar off, put it away. And you might be thinking, isn't that too long, separated from the behavior and the correction? No, if you understand how markers work. And this is why markers are so important. And understanding how the events work. So the dog did something that he didn't want the dog to do during trial. The dog knew that they weren't supposed to do it because he's a great trainer and he's done a lot of reps. The dog did it. He said no. The dog goes, oh no, I'm getting a correction. He entered the correction event. So this would be no different than saying yes and reaching into my treat to grab, or reaching in my vest to grab the treat, pulling it out and handing it to the dog. Once we say yes, especially dogs that are more advanced in the training, new puppy, new dog in training, you're not going to have as much time until they're classically conditioned. But the dog makes the connection because we entered the event. So it was the same thing with the correction. So then when he goes out on a trial, the dog believes, even though he's naked, that he can give him a correction. And it greatly enhanced the reliability of the obedience. Yeah, and if what Arm & Hammer's talking about, he has different courses, Nino, on SDS K9. I did the MVP. I think when I got it, it was 2,500. Okay. I'm reward-based first, but then go from there. Yeah, and that's how I am as well. I think that's how most trainers, most good trainers, I would say, we start with rewards. We teach the dog. Is it a good idea to use a ball as a distraction while training with food so the dog can learn to ignore distractions? That's going to depend on your dog. So that is something you could eventually lead to, but when we look at the environmental difficulty assessment, I talked about this earlier. If you're using a ball as a distraction, this is where it very much depends on the dog, and it depends on how far in the training they are. If your dog really, really loves the ball and you throw the ball, even though you can get the dog to, let's say, maintain a stay position, which is not too difficult to do, the dog may not want the food anymore because now the dog is so focused on the ball. So you may not be able to get the dog to work with the food. That distraction might be too difficult. So you'd have to gradually work up to that. I'll give you an example with my dog, Ari. She loves toys so much that the moment I pull out toys, food is worthless to her. She only cares about the toys. Now I can use toys to reinforce obedience she already knows, but the moment I bring out toys, food is now a distraction from the toy. She doesn't want the food. My dog Charlie loves food more than anything. He also loves toys, but food is his number one thing. So I could be playing with a toy with him, but if I bring out food, he's going to take the food and then he'll go back to the toy. So for him, the food is more motivating. But if we simplify it and we just think about it being a distraction, how much of a distraction is it for your dog, and have you worked up to that level of distraction depending on how much your dog loves toys? How much ball drive does your dog have? How much prey drive does your dog have? Having a ball in the environment that's not moving is usually going to be easier than one that's bouncing across the room. So we can take something, we can simplify it to make it easier for the dog to perform. As our dog is successful, we can make it more difficult. But that's just environmental difficulty assessment. We're adding distractions that are motivational factors outside of us for the dog. Do you have any suggestions for training very small dogs? Obviously, there are specific concerns, such as no pressure can be applied and the dog tends to not walk very close. So working with small dogs, I follow the same process as I would. So I follow the same process with a Chihuahua that I would with a Great Dane. If I can get the dog conditioned, if I can get them interested in food, I'm going to use food. The only difference is if I'm doing luring exercises, like I'm luring a Great Dane, I might be holding the food up this high, getting the dog to move, right? And then with the puppy or the smaller dog, I'm having to squat down. I'm working more on my knees and my thighs. And so then I'm going to just have to squat down to work with that dog. You can do leash pressure on small dogs unless the dog has some sort of issue with their neck. But when we teach leash pressure, remember, it's usually, when we're doing it the right way, a cue to get them to perform behaviors. So and you can even see on the course, when I'm doing the leash cues with my dog demonstrating, the leash almost never gets tight because she understands it as a cue to get her to perform behaviors. But the process is the same. The science is the same. What varies between each dog is going to be saying things like their size, their coat, their temperament, their disposition, what motivates them, their fears or nervous behaviors or confidence levels. These things are going to vary, but the science is the same. Converting food drive to toy drive. That's going to be if you can build toy drive with a dog, and that's drive building exercises. This is what I was talking about earlier when I was talking about the foundational work that we often do with dogs for protection or sport work. We put them on a back tie, we tease them with a toy. When they get excited and frustrated, then we give them the toy. So we can increase the dog wanting something by building that frustration, and that's going to build the toy drive. Now, not every dog is going to have toy drive. If they have some toy drive, we can usually build upon that toy drive. We can, over time, adjust the way our dogs look at toys. But the way our dog is, their genetics towards toys is often going to have an impact on how we approach them. And I'll give you an example. I talked about this before with my dogs. So Ari, my Malinois, she loves the fight. Not in an aggressive way, but she loves tug. Like if I have a tug toy, she wants to play tug, she wants to shake, she wants to push into me. She loves that back and forth of tug. That's what she loves. If I let go of the toy, that's almost a form of negative punishment to her. The moment I let go, she's right back at me. Maverick enjoys tug, but for him, this is my German Shepherd, he much rather take the item and possess it. He'd rather run with the item, have a victory lap, and go, look what I have the toy. He likes to hold the toy. When I first started working with him, if it was up to him, he would grab all the toys and he would run to his little area in the corner of the room and he would lay down and he'd hold all his toys. And because of that, we have to adjust our play style depending on our dog's different levels of motivation and how they look at toys. If I take a dog that is very, very possessive, when I play tug with them, there's a good likelihood that the dog will be good at playing tug. So instinctively, we're like, oh, this dog's great. He's really playing nicely. And you could put a lot of pressure and the dog will hold on to the toy. And then we can even give the dog a win. So we're like, you win the toy. We're not pulling it away. We're allowing the dog to win. For a dog that's very possessive, they would probably hold on to it the whole time if they're confident enough. But if I make the dog work too hard in the beginning, he's not going to want to bring the toy back to me. Because he'd rather possess it. He's like, oh, I had to work so hard to get that toy. I'm not going back. So with Maverick in the beginning, I had to make the tug work so easy for him. I really had to make it easy and I had to give him quick wins. So he was willing to bring it back to me. Because again, if I made it too difficult in the beginning, he wouldn't bring it back to me. Even though he would continue the tug during the initial play, he wouldn't bring it back to me. Another thing that possessive dogs tend to do, when we go to reach, and he still sometimes does this, but when we go to reach for the toy, the dog will pull their head away. They don't want you to grab it. Whereas Ari will bring it to me and she's like, give me the toy. So with Maverick, I did a lot of running away from him backwards, and I would hold my hands and I would do this little motion. So then I would run back and he would aim and bring it in. I would grab it for a moment and then I would let him take it again. And you can also tell dogs' confidence usually by growling. So if a dog growls a lot, it can often, not always, but it can often mean that the dog's not completely confident. Less growling usually, again, not always, means the dog is more confident. And that's something to pay attention to. So this also brings me to how we add pressure when we're playing tug, or when we're playing with a dog and we're engaging. If I have a dog that's less confident, I'm going to increase the distance from me to the toy by using a ball on a rope or a flirt pole. Because if I have a flirt pole, it's like a fishing pole. I have a pole and it has a string and it has a toy at the end. If I'm using that to play tug with the dog, in the dog's mind, they possess it way more than I do because they're far away and they have the actual item. If I'm holding the toy and they're holding the toy, now who has it? Do I have it? Does the dog have it? But again, if I'm holding the string and the dog's 10 feet away from me, I can engage that toy, but the dog believes that they possess it more than I do, which in that moment, technically they do. So there's lots of, and this is why reading a dog is important. And you can read books like For the Love of a Dog, which is a great book on understanding dog body language, but a lot of it comes down to simply working with a lot of dogs, paying attention to your dog. A lot of dog body language is very, very similar to human body language. Dogs can get upset. Dogs can get, and what I mean by upset, so let me use a different word. They can be disappointed is a big one. You know, if you get your dog excited, you're like, you ready to go on a walk? And then you go, hi, just kidding. Dog's gonna be like, oh, because they were excited to go on a walk. So a lot of the emotions that we have, dogs have very similar emotions. Their body language is also very similar. And then if you could pay attention to patterns, you can start to recognize it as well. So like, I'm not a fan of letting dogs resolve conflicts. Like, I don't like doing that. If I notice two dogs are about to get into a conflict, I intervene and I prefer to prevent it from happening. This is the same with a dog being reactive on leash. I react to the dog before the dog reacts, meaning if I'm walking a dog and that dog locks onto something, let's say another dog across the street, and its body gets really stiff and it freezes and it's staring at that other dog, I'm going to say heel and I'm going to take the dog and we're going in a different direction. I'm not going to wait for that to turn into rah, 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 rah. Or another one where two dogs approach each other and one goes around and puts its head up on top of the other one, and this one's looking forward and the other one's looking down. It's like there's a good likelihood that that's going to turn into a dog fight. Not always, because this dog that goes over the other dog, if this dog kind of submits, a lot of times that would resolve it. But if the dog doesn't submit, then it can turn into a dog fight. You can often see small little subtle changes too. So there's a video, and I can't remember her name right now, Patricia, I think. Anyways, the one that wrote For the Love of a Dog. She talks about this video, and you could pull it up. And so I think it's two large dog breeds. I don't remember if it was mastiffs or something, but they're looking at each other like this. Both of them are pretty stiff, and there's a pile of kibble or something in between both of them. And as they're looking at each other, one of them does this. Just a subtle turn, that dog submitted to the other one. But these little things, after you work with a lot of dogs, you can start recognizing these patterns and you can intervene before something bad happens. And that is always much better than trying to fix a bad behavior that a dog starts to practice. Sorry, I don't even know how I got into that. I think, food drive into toy drive. So really what I was getting into with that was reading your dog and then adjusting your play style according to the dog. And then if you can have a dog motivated for toys, you can incorporate it into the obedience. The way I incorporate toys into the obedience is I use it for behaviors my dogs already know. I don't use it to teach behaviors. I use it to reinforce behaviors. So I teach most behaviors with food and the leash. Once the dog knows it and they can perform it on the verbal, then I can reward with toys. When rewarding with toys, I like to have a good drop it command. I want some level of impulse control. So this is where you can put a toy down in front of the dog and the dog's not going to grab it until you tell them to. And I want the dog to be able to bring the toy back to me. If I don't have those, I'm not going to incorporate toys into the obedience because it's not going to be very helpful if I tell the dog to do something, I reward them, and then they just run off with the toy. I want them to bring it back. And this is even the same with chuck it. So I do chuck it with my dogs just about every single day. And a lot of the times I just throw it. They bring it to me, they drop it, they throw it. I want them to get a good exercise. I want them to have a lot of fun. Sometimes I incorporate very, very simple obedience. So my secondary terminal marker, which I heard this one trainer talking about it recently. He calls it the pre-MAC marker. I call it a secondary terminal marker. Release plus reward. So the dog goes to get their reward. My primary terminal or termination marker is the dog comes to me to get the reward. The release, they come to me. Secondary termination marker, they go and get it, or pre-MAC marker, as this other trainer called it. And he called it the pre-MAC because that's where, if you know the pre-MAC principle, you get the dog to do a less likely behavior to do something the dog would rather do, which is basically positive reinforcement. If you sit and lay down, I'll play tug with you. So pre-MAC principle. Less likely behavior, we get them to do that for the higher probability of the other behavior, so it's essentially a reward. So to release the dog to go get it. So I will have the chuck it with the ball, and I might tell my dog sit down, spin, center, get it, and then I throw the chuck it. If you're curious at how I teach the secondary termination marker, it's super, super easy. All I do, I start off by saying get it, and then I throw the food. Get it, and then I throw the food. After enough of those, get it means I'm going to throw food. Then what I do, and you can incorporate this just during mealtime, if let's say, because like my dogs do eat, I have this work to eat feeder, so it's very similar to like feeding a dog out of a bowl. In the beginning, I don't like to feed dogs out of a bowl because I like to build that food drive and I like to incorporate it with play. So we increase the desire, positive association plus food feels good, makes the food drive really great. But at like my dogs, even on occasion, sometimes I'll still feed them out of a bowl every now and then. So after we get through those initial, we might feed them out of the bowl. So you could put the bowl down, have your dog sitting at a sit stay, and you say, get it, and now your dog's gonna run and get the reward. And that's how I start to transfer it from me throwing the reward to the dog going and getting the reward. And then we could transfer that to toys and things like that. I have a rough collie that is 18 months old. He has a strong herding instinct. I like to train him for therapy work, but is it setting up a dog to fail when you don't train to their strengths? Training a dog to their strengths is going to benefit the dog on a psychological level, meaning they're going to enjoy it, so they're going to be happy. Dogs that are primarily bred for sport work and police work, they're very happy when they're doing those things that they're bred for. Ari and Maverick, they love doing bite work. Charlie loves retrieving, that is his jam. So when we can incorporate things that the dog is naturally going to like because of their genetics, it's going to increase the quality of their life. But it doesn't mean that you can't have them do other things like being a therapy dog or a service dog. Where the conflict might arise is if the dog's instincts to do certain behaviors interrupt the requirements that you might have for therapy work or service work or something like that. So that's where we might have to start thinking, is this dog going to be a dog suitable for therapy work? Maybe, maybe not, because we have to consider the amount of training. So like when I'm helping someone with a service dog, the most important step is the very first step, which is getting the right dog. Because you can take a dog that, let's say you get it from a breeder that has been breeding for service dog work And that's their main goal for the past 20 years. That dog, to get to the level of being a service dog, is probably going to be significantly easier and significantly faster than most other dogs. This is the same when police departments are looking for dogs that they're going to get. So one of my friends who I haven't talked to him in a little while, but he owns a dog training business down in Texas, and he is also the head canine handler of his department. He teaches all the other canine. He's the main guy, number one guy. And so he also will go out and he'll be part of getting new dogs in for the program. And the most important step is getting the right dog from the beginning. And he has all these different tests to test the dog to make sure the dog has the right genetics to be the right dog for the training program. I'll give you an example. One of the tests that he does is he takes a toy that the dog wants and he puts the toy in a location that the dog cannot get to. And then he times to see how long the dog will work to get the reward before the dog gives up. If the dog gives up quickly, he doesn't want that dog. If the dog continues to work and doesn't give up at all, that's a good dog. It shows very, very high levels of perseverance, and that transfers over very, very well to scent detection work. Because if you have a dog searching a 20,000 square foot warehouse, you don't want the dog giving up very easily if they don't find the odor. So these things can come into play, but I hope that answers the question as far as if I'm working with a certain dog that has certain instincts to do a certain job, I still want to do things that are going to satisfy their instincts while doing the other things that I would like them to perform, and then using those instincts as a way to benefit the other training. So just, dogs that like food, all dogs do this, so that's kind of silly, but using the food drive or using the toy drive, doing things like that, incorporating it. We always want to make the training as fun as possible. Okay, lots of hearts. Thank you for that. How do people's dogs focus on them when outside? I have a 6-month-old puppy, and inside he is focused, but outside he just wants to sniff. Is this a breed thing, or will my puppy grow out of it? This goes back to environmental difficulty assessment. So this is just a harder or more challenging situation for your dog. So if you notice that the environment is too difficult for your dog and you're not getting the performance and you're finding that you're having to add more pressure and add more things to get the dog to perform, that just means that might be too difficult. One of the things that I do with dogs that have very high drives to use their nose, they want to smell everything, is before I start asking them to do obedience, I might give them the time to get that out of their system in that environment. So I might go to an environment, I might ask the dog to do something very, very simple. So I'm gonna ask the dog to do a 10-second downstay or something, or maybe not even that. Maybe I just have the dog on a loose leash. Don't pull on the leash. You can stand, you can sit, you can lay down, just don't pull on the leash. I do that for a little bit after I had the dog navigate through this very simple challenge, then I can reward the dog with the environment. That goes back to that secondary termination marker or the pre-mac marker. And then excuse me, I'm burping a lot today. Then we can let the dog smell the environments. Get it out of your system. Go smell, check it out. Let him do that for a while. After he's done that for quite a bit, now that's not as exciting or as interesting. Same thing in the house. When you first take a dog in the house, they're gonna wanna smell a bunch of things. But after they spend a lot of time there, these odors are no longer as exciting, and now it's easier for them to focus on you. Same thing with the backyard. The dog is gonna smell everything initially, but once they've done it, unless a new odor is presented, like a squirrel's been in the yard or a rabbit, they're gonna smell that. But we have to build upon it. So with any dog that you're working with, if you notice the environment is too difficult, then either A, you have to make the environment easier in order to build your dog up, or B, you have to make the task easier for the dog to perform. So that's a good way to look at it. So a focused heel, even for my dogs in some situations, a focused heel might be too difficult. If there's a lot of things going on, okay, I'm not gonna do the focused heel, I'm gonna work on this, build upon it. Success, as Tom Rose would always say, success builds success as your dog is successful. So those are the two main things with the environment. Either make the environment easier, get the dog better at what you're asking them to do, and then gradually make it more difficult as the dog proves to be successful, or ask for a simple or easier behavior for the dog to perform in that environment. And also make sure the dog is generalized. Okay. Yep, so someone was mentioning the service dog being pet we were talking about. I'm sorry, we've been going through this very slowly. I'll keep talking for a while. You leave, come back. And if I do answer someone's question and they're not on and you're watching and you know what question I asked, if you put the comment and put a timestamp so when they come back, they can see it, and I'll take those timestamps and I'll try to put it in, or I'll tag the comment or something, some way to help them find it a little bit easier. Okay, how do you deal with a reactive dog? My dog is 13 months. Let's see, fear, arousal, reactivity to humans. When she has her e-collar on, I correct her barking, but is she learning? Okay, so we were talking about, and I'll bounce off that with the remote collar. This is a good segue into the remote collar. So with dogs being reactive, we talked about that. That's all that environmental difficulty stuff, all that environmental difficulty assessment where the environment is either too difficult for the dog or their training is not adequate for that at the time. Now, let me get the collar so you guys can see how this works. So this is the Easy 900. Most people are going to be completely fine with the Mini Educator if you're going to use a remote collar. And if you're opposed to remote collars, you think they're terrible, my piece of advice would be to try to learn more about it, because a lot of people that hate on these tools, it's often because they just simply don't know enough about it, or they've only experienced people that use it the wrong way. So a remote collar could be the best tool that you use when it comes to getting reliability with your dog and having off-leash freedom. It could also be the absolute worst tool if you do it the wrong way. And this is why there's such extreme opinions about the remote collar. But anyways, this is the Mini Educator. This will work with most dogs. If you have a dog that needs a higher correction level, then you could upgrade to something like the Boss. The functions with this collar is the same as the Mini Educator, as the Micro Educator. They're just stronger units, and they may reach a further distance. You would have to look at that on the website. The Easy Educator has a few additional features, so you can change the buttons to whatever you want. The way that I have it is, this is a Nick, this is a continuous, and then both of these are Pavlovian conditioning with the tone. And the tone, this is what it sounds like. So now I want you to pay attention. You see how as long as the light stays on, that's how long I'm holding down the button. Once I release, that's when the collar stops. So if you can hear the noise, when the noise stops, boom, right there it transitions to a correction. Now, if I press it down and I release it, no correction. But if I hold it down, the dog would get a correction. And if I continue to hold it, it would be a continuous correction. Now, the way that I've been using this, I've been trying it in different scenarios and how I can use the tone. And what has seemed to be the best with my dogs, at least as far as them understanding it and me being able to utilize it to communicate certain things, is I basically have been using the tone after I give my commands or my cues. So any command or my signal for negative reinforcement. And I release it the moment my dog complies. And they figure it out very, very quickly. When I first started with Maverick, I just used it. And I used it, and then he had to figure it out. Now, what's really important with this is when we press the tone, if you're using it the way that I use it. So simply put, I use it as negative reinforcement that will transition to positive punishment upon non-compliancy. So let's think about that seatbelt analogy. If I have the seatbelt, I get in the car starts beeping. If I don't buckle my seatbelt, imagine if the car seat gave you a muscle stim. And that's what the remote collars do. It's a muscle stimulator. So let's say the car beeps for 10 seconds. If you buckle your seatbelt, great, the beeping stops, nothing happens. But if you don't buckle your seatbelt, after 10 seconds, you get a stim from the car seat. So that would be negative reinforcement transitioning into positive punishment. That would get way more people to buckle their seatbelt. And as long as they know to buckle their seatbelt before the stim happens, there's not going to be any sort of correction. That's how I was treating initially the remote collar, and I first started practicing it on Maverick. So when I would do my morning exploration, I just started to use it. Now, naturally, the dog is going to react. If they react correctly, I would remove it. So let's say he's 30 feet away from me and he starts to sniff at something on the ground. He's messing with something on the ground. I don't know what he's messing with. And so I want to stop him from doing that. I can call him to me. That would work really well if you have a good recall. But what I wanted to try was the tone. I wanted to do this tone so I'm not having to constantly vocalize my intent or what I want from my dogs. I can just communicate easily through the remote. So my dog would be over there. I would press the tone. He would hear it. He would stop doing what he was doing and the tone would go away because I released the moment he would stop. So he sticks his head down. He lifts his head up. It stops. So that goes back to opera conditioning. He starts to learn certain behaviors make the noise go off, and then certain behaviors make the noise stop. And if he doesn't comply to it, so let's say he keeps his nose down, because just because a dog understands negative reinforcement doesn't mean they're going to comply to it. This is the same as like leash pressure. And I've used this with my leash pressure as well. Just because a dog understands leash pressure doesn't mean they always comply to it. There's been lots of dogs that I want them to do something and they just decide in that moment they're not going to do it. And this is how I used to fix it. So I would apply the pressure, and let's say this is the dog, and dog goes, no, I'm not going to do that. And I apply the pressure and the dog resists. Well, what I used to do was I would say no. I would loosen the leash quickly. I would pop the leash, and then I'd go right back to the pressure. So it would look like this. No. And then right back to the pressure. And once I corrected, the dog goes, oh, I didn't know you could correct me for that. And they move forward, and I go, yay, good dog. But what I've done now with this, and it works incredibly well, is if I go to apply the leash pressure and the dog resists, they move forward, I turn it off. So now I get compliancy without having to correct. Now, and the reason why I thought about this is because the person was asking about the dog being reactive. Now, when a dog gets really, really excited, so this is what a lot of trainers call loading. We load a dog, we get them excited, and we can use that energy in the obedience. But if we get our dogs too loaded, if they're too excited, then we lose all control and it becomes very difficult to communicate. And I gave an example earlier. If you've seen the movie Home Alone, you remember when Macaulay Culkin's running around the house going, ah, and he's like super excited and he's having fun. That is the level that my dog would get to, Maverick, when I would pull out the e-collars. Because I classically condition my dogs to the collars. The collars mean when I take these collars out, my dogs know we are going to the park, we're going to do exploration, we're going to play tug, we're going to play fetch, we're going to do something that they like. So the moment they see this, they get very, very excited. Well, I classically conditioned Maverick too well to the collar, that when I brought out the collar, he would run around like Macaulay Culkin in Home Alone. He's running around, barking, just pure joy, can't control so much energy. And if I would try to get him to do something, I would have to use a lot of pressure, and he would bark through the pressure, and it was kind of obnoxious. So then I had a couple choices. I could, A, uncondition him to that, where I bring the collar out, and then I don't put it on him. I bring it out, I don't put it on him. I bring it out, I don't put it on him. So then it doesn't predict us going and doing something that he enjoys, but rather nothing that he can predict the pattern. I just randomize it. But what I did, because I wanted to test it out to see if this would work, is I used the tone. And the tone was enough to snap him out of that crazy energy. So they all got really excited, or they all get really excited, and I would tell them all down. So I would say down, Ari and Charlie would lay right down, Maverick, too excited, too much in the zone. After I would give him the down command, I would press the tone. And he would hear that tone, instantly comply and lay down. If I were to correct him for non-compliancy, that would amp him up even more. He would get more excited, more crazy. But using the tone, it would snap him out of it, and he would lay down right away. And it worked beautifully. And this is when I started to incorporate it after commands. Now, if you know how dogs learn, if they learn a pattern, they will perform on the first part of the equation in which represents the end result. Meaning, if I tell a dog down, and then I cue the dog into the down dog then lays down, I then say yes, I then give them the reward. They learn that whole sequence if the pattern is always consistent, and when I say down, the dog lays down. They skip the other elements. Using the tone has also increased my dog's speed even when they're less motivated. So there's something known as positive behavioral contrast and negative behavioral contrast. And I intentionally do this in my videos, and I'm sure a lot of trainers do as well. So when I train my dogs, not on camera, I use their kibble. Now their kibble, I use N and D, so the letter N and then the and symbol D, N and D, and I do the maxi giant size. The kibble pieces, it works great for them. The kibble pieces are the same size, roughly as a quarter. So it's very easy to handle. I'm not dropping pieces all over the place. My dogs have very high food drive, but that's what I use when I'm training them. When I do my videos, I use freeze-dried dog food. This is a slight increase. Let's say the kibble to them is worth, let's say $10 an hour. Let's just use that number. The freeze-dried might be like $15 an hour. So it's an increase. It's not $100. I'm not going to cook steak, but I am giving them an increase. This is positive behavioral contrast. Normally I train them with kibble, then suddenly I pull out these freeze-dried food, and their motivation increases and they perform better. So motivation plays a big part of how our dogs are going to perform. And I do that because I want the dogs to look better on camera. I have no shame in my game, and I'm pretty confident most people do that, positive behavioral contrast. That's what I do to increase their motivation. I also do that if I'm adding something more difficult to the training. A slight increase, not a huge increase, because then you're not going to be able to go back to the kibble. I'm not going to start training with steak because then they won't want to work for kibble. But this is a really important thing to keep in mind because we can do certain things like this to our advantage. Even if you're not filming yourself, maybe you're taking your dog somewhere where you know the environment is more difficult, you slightly increase the value of the reward, positive behavioral contrast. Now, negative behavioral contrast is the opposite. You train your dog with steak all the time, and then you offer your dog kibble, your dog's not going to want to work. So now the tone, this was actually increasing my dog's speed. So I would give a command, I would say down, then the tone. The moment my dog starts to move, I release the tone. Come, then the tone. The moment the dog starts to move in my direction, I release the tone. This worked really, really well for the drop it command. Dogs don't always want to drop things, and this is often where a lot of trainers will lose points in competitive obedience routines for protection sport. They'll lose points on slow to out. They tell their dog out, the dog doesn't want to out right away, and they lose points on slow to out. This has helped with Maverick quite a bit because, again, he likes to possess the toys. So I started to tell him, Maverick, out, and then once he released, I would release the tone. And I did that on every single one, and the tone is basically like, hey, it's a guarantee. If you don't comply, there will be a consequence. And what ends up happening and what you find is you get much faster compliancy. Now, of course, I still reward the dogs. I still use it like that. But this has greatly increased reliability and greatly reduced the amount of corrections that the dog would receive. So it's a fantastic way to communicate. And if you have one of these collars, so I was talking to someone the other day who had one of these, and they're like, mine doesn't have the tone. It only has the vibrate. They all have the tone. You just have to switch it. So if you have this, the setting comes where this button is a tone. So you press the T button on the side and it's a tone. Or not a tone, I'm sorry, vibrate. But if you switch it, and I think you have to turn the collar to 0, you tap tone and the on-off button simultaneously, and it switches to a tone. And then it's the Pavlovian conditioning. So as long as you hold it, it'll tone and it'll transition to the correction. Now the difference between this and a conditioned punisher. So conditioned punisher is a sound that mostly guarantees the correction. So my no is a conditioned punisher. When I tell no to my dogs, more likely than not, they're going to receive a correction. The tone does not guarantee a correction. In fact, it's the opposite of that. If you comply to the tone, there's no correction at all. So you can always avoid the correction through compliancy. And this makes it more clear, and it also takes a little bit of pressure off of the handler. So I was talking to one of my other students, and she had a really big issue with her dog picking up leaves in the yard. And she didn't want to correct the dog with the remote right away because she didn't want the dog to be nervous of the yard. And she didn't think it was fair to just correct the dog right away, which I agree. And she didn't want to always have to put a long line to control the dog from the distance. So I said, try giving the tone a shot. And so she did, and she reached back out to me and she goes, it worked beautifully. I no longer have the issue. If my dog goes to pick up something, I press the tone. I don't feel bad about pressing the tone because it's negative reinforcement. It's not like I'm correcting my dog right away, the change of behavior. And she said one time the dog ignored it. The dog got the correction. After that, no longer ignored the tone. So now she solved the problem of the dog picking up random things in the yard with very minimal correction, very clear communication. I also use it for the stay. So my dog breaks a stay, I say wrong, then I press the tone. So now I don't have to say wrong and go make the dog do it. The tone does it for me. Same thing with the dog jumping up on the sofa. Dog jumps up on the sofa, wrong, tone. Dog jumps off, I release the tone. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, if I'm using this remote, does it mean I always have to use the remote? Dogs do become collar smart. They know when they have the collar on and they know when they don't. They're not stupid. And there's also a certain amount of time in which you want to keep a collar on. You don't want to keep a collar on your dog 24/7, not these remote collars, because these connectors, they have to be on the dog's neck. And if it's on the dog's neck too much, it can rub, it can irritate, and it can hurt their neck. So I don't put it on them for long. Like 4 hours is usually the max that I'll do. I won't keep it on longer than that. And when I take it off, I check the dog's neck to make sure their skin's not irritated. So we don't want to hurt our dogs. But they do become collar smart, but they are also creatures of habit. And this is another important thing to keep in mind, and it's a distinction that we need to make when it comes to obedience. And this is one of the pitfalls of board and trains or stay in trains. And it's something that when I do stay in trains, which right now I'm not because I'm in the middle of moving, but when I do stay in train with dogs, I make it very clear to the humans that they're going to have to train their dog. The only thing that we do as trainers when it comes to a stay and train is we make the process easier for the handler. But the dog hasn't reached the level of habit where the dog, so like Ari, I've been training her for so long that she performs out of habit. I could tell Charlie to do something and Ari will do it. She's so built on the habit of just instantly performing to when I say to do something, she doesn't even think about it. There's not like should I do that? Is this more interesting? She just does it. That usually doesn't happen for at least, from my experience, 9 months of consistent training. So you do it for 9 months, which is a long time when you're being very consistent with something. Usually around that time frame, maybe a little bit before, maybe a little bit after, is where your dog's going to start doing everything on autopilot. And then you don't need the collar. Now, I still use the collar no matter how well trained the dog is that I'm working with anytime I have them off leash. And this is a safety thing. I mentioned this before. There's so many people in my neighborhood that walk around with their dogs off leash, no remote collar, and it drives me nuts. There's been times where I have dogs out that I'm working and one of the neighbor's dogs just comes running up. And then I have to look at him and go, what if this dog was dog aggressive? Now this dog aggressive dog just attacks and as an older dog, attacks your older dog because you don't want to keep him on a leash or a remote collar. So you have to have control of your dog. Okay. Zach says and to answer that other person's question, I would try messing around with the tone. So for the barking, the tone helps a lot with that as well. Again, it's a warning before the correction. 3-year-old German Shepherd male has become quite aggressive and protective against strangers coming to my house. Okay, and this is one of the reasons for those of you that are dog trainers, and when I talk to dog trainers, I always tell them, do not do a lesson in someone's home that has a dog that is human aggressive, because you're way more likely to get bit going inside the dog's territory. So when a dog is in their territory, they're usually going to be more confident and they're more likely to practice certain behaviors. Now, if I'm assessing a dog that is acting in a way that I don't like, with every dog that I train, and this is important to note too, every single dog that I train, I never skip the initial steps of the communication. I always build a relationship with the dog. I always teach them markers. I always teach them the lure. I always teach them leash pressure. The only time I skip the marker or the lure is if the dog has zero food drive and I don't have the time to build the food drive. And the human, like if I'm just doing lessons and the owner is not following the advice to build the dog's food drive, well, we have limited tools then. Every dog can build their food drive. It just takes time. And if you don't have that time, okay, but I always develop these communication channels. It's important for me to be able to let the dog know when it's doing something that I like and when it's doing something that I don't like in the most clear way possible. The more clear we are, the faster the dogs learn, the happier they are in the process. So I look at issues that we have with our dogs, 7 main issues. So 2 main issues actually, obedience and behavioral. And with obedience, we have a dog not listening to a command and a dog not staying in a stay. And for behavioral issues, we have a dog violating boundaries, doing things that we don't want them to do, dangerous behaviors, destructive behaviors, behaviors based on fear, and behaviors based on aggression. So when I look at it, I want to figure out, like, I couldn't give if Zach was just, let's say Zach reached out, and this is a person who asked about their 3-year-old German Shepherd. I don't know if he's still on here or not, but if Zach asked me about this in a text message or something like that, or email, I would say, get me video of your dog doing this behavior, and then we can talk about it. And the reason why is because I would need to see a video so I can determine whether or not the behavior the dog is performing is based on fear, which is very, very common, or if it is just aggression, or if it's a self-reinforcing behavior. So a lot of times a dog might be doing something that from the outside looking in looks aggressive, but it's a self-reinforcing behavior. When you look at that video that I did with my friend Sergio and his dog Harley, where we were teaching her how to bark, that's the same exercise that we do for drive building. The dog looks aggressive, but in that moment, the dog's actually having fun. If you look at the thumbnail, she looks very vicious and aggressive, but she's having a good time. She's having a lot of fun. We're rewarding her with the toy. So why the dog is doing it and what the dog is actually feeling is going to change the approach. If it's fear, my go-to for fear is almost always counter conditioning and desensitization. There's other techniques like flooding, where we flood the dog with whatever it is that they're afraid of. They can't focus on the fear and they calm down. That one, there's a lot of controversy on it because done the wrong way, it can cause a lot of issues. So saying something about Larry, Larry's a good trainer too. So what was I saying about the dog with the having fun? So if the dog's reacting and it's fun, that's an easy fix. If the German Shepherd's barking and they're having fun, very, very easy fix. Yeah, it does have the tone. And mess around with it, I'm telling you, you're gonna love it. Just be good at releasing at the right time. But anyways, if the dog is reacting, barking at people, and I look at the video and I go, okay, that's actually the dog's having fun. This is fun for the dog. That's the easiest fix. So with self-reinforcing behavior, we can either prevent, redirect, or correct. So I can prevent the dog from practicing the behavior, I can redirect to something else, or I can correct them. And when I say correct, I mean using positive punishment to stop that behavior. So that's usually the easiest and fastest fix. No, I haven't tried the course by Tom Davis. Tom Davis is a good trainer too. I did a podcast with him, really cool guy. But anyways, so if the dog is doing it and it's a self-reinforcing behavior, for a quick fix, I'm probably going to correct the dog. Dog goes to do it, no correction. If I had the dog trained on the tone, I would probably tell the dog wrong. Again, that's my marker for negative reinforcement. I would do the tone. Once the dog complies, I release the tone, no correction. I got him to stop doing it without actually having to reach the point of giving him a correction. And then I would stop him from practicing that behavior. If I didn't have the remote collar, I would probably start with leash pressure and I would cue him to the desired behavior. Often redirecting to a climb command is great. We're saying, hey, don't bark, go to the climb instead. So we're giving him the preferred choice when that situation arises. Someone comes to the door, go to your bed. Don't run to the door and bark. That's not what I want. After I teach the dog that, Then once the dog knows the rules, I give the dog the correction. If the dog is doing it out of actual aggression, then often I'll follow that same process. But a lot of times, aggression is stemmed by fear, or it's being triggered by fear. If the dog is afraid, then I would have to do more of that counter conditioning that I talked about before, which counter conditioning is it's classically conditioning a dog to a negative or a fear-inducing stimulus. So instead of a neutral stimulus, it's a negative or fear-inducing stimulus, and we pair it with something positive. And this is why it's important to be able to understand the process of how dogs learn. So, sorry, I was reading that message that came up. I have worked with fear-aggressive dogs. I'll get to that message eventually. Sorry, I know so many questions, and I take a long time answering each one because there's a lot of information. So if the dog is aggressive, then, or fear, if it's fear, let me give you an example of a dog being, so this is why techniques don't always work on the same dog. Let's take one situation with the same goal with two different types of dogs, and then knowing how to approach each one. So let's say we have a dog that we want people to be able to come up and pet the dog. Let's say that's the goal. We want the dog to sit nicely, and we want people to be able to pet the dog. One dog loves people, wants to be around every single person possible. The other dog is cautious and uncomfortable about people. Well, with those two dogs, I would have the dog that is very confident, not confident, but the dog that just loves people. So your happy-go-lucky lab, their whole body wakes and gets really excited. That dog, I'm going to have the dog, or I'm going to have the human rather, approach the dog. And I'm going to have the human react according to how the dog reacts. So then this is just an example. Let's say we have the dog right here off to the left side of the screen, if you're only listening and you're not watching, and the human's, let's say, 10 feet away. I'm going to tell the human to start walking. As the human's walking towards the dog, if the dog gets excited, breaks the position, moves forward, I'm going to have the human move away. Dog sits back down, human comes towards. Dog gets too excited, human goes away. So this is operant conditioning. Dog learns, I sit, my reward will slowly come to me. If I get up, my reward will go away. If I sit, my reward comes back. And you keep doing that until the dog maintains the position and you can reward them. That is a very effective technique. And of course, this also depends on how much training the dog has had prior, right? That might be too difficult for even the first 10 sessions. That might be a session 30 sessions down the road or something like that. Now, the other dog that's uncomfortable or nervous around people, I'm going to have the dog approach the human. I'm going to have the human alleviate pressure by turning away from the dog. And maybe the food's going to be down on the side. The reason why I'm going to have the dog approach the human is because that's going to make the dog feel more in control. So the dog's going to slowly approach the human. And if the dog's uncomfortable, this is where we can use behavioral adjustment training. So this is a good technique for that, where you read the dog's body language. If the dog is uncomfortable, you go, okay, we'll back up, and you back away. Dog gets comfortable, you start to go back. Eventually, the dog feels comfortable enough, they can take food from the person as they're facing away. And then over time, the person will slowly turn and become more frontal, and eventually they'll be able to pet. But you can see how the approach is much different depending on the dog and the goal. I'll give you another example with dogs that bark out of fear. And this works really well, but the difficult part with this one is getting multiple people to do it so they don't become generalized. But this is very interesting. This is a fun one. And I learned this, or I started to use this because of what I learned from protection sports. So if you remember, if you were listening when we were talking about getting a dog to get excited for drive building. So we take a dog, we put him on a back tie, and I tease him with the toy. If the dog barks and gets excited, I bring the toy closer. Dog barks and gets excited, I bring the toy closer. And I almost do like a little baseball diamond sort of route. So I'll go from like base 1 to base 2 to base 3. Just I'm visualizing it. I'm not actually on a baseball field, but I'm moving kind of in that order. When the dog barks, I move a little closer. Dog barks, I move a little closer. And then eventually I reward the dog. So the dog learns the barking brings the reward to them. I've done this with a handful of dogs that would fear bark. So someone comes over to the house and the hackles go up and they start to bark and they're backing up as they bark. So you got the hackles and you have the dog backing up as they bark, very clear sign that the dog is probably fearful, and it's not aggression. It's more like, hey, stay away, I'm afraid of you. I easily stop dogs from barking by it's funny too. When they bark, I walk very neutral. I don't stare at them. I don't make an angry face, nothing like that. I just walk in their direction as long as they bark. The moment they stop barking, I instantly turn and I walk the other way. Now, when I first do that, you get the little dog barking at the person running away. The moment I turn around, dog's like, oh, rah, 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 and they start barking at me again. Once they start barking at me, I turn back around and I walk towards the dog. So I'm teaching the dog, when you bark, you are actually drawing me to you. Now, you don't want to corner a dog like this because they will probably bite you. But I walk slowly enough that the dog can stay away from me. They're not actually being at risk of me getting close to them, but they learn that barking brings me to them, and the moment they stop barking, I go away. So after a few minutes of this, the dog completely stops barking because they know barking brings exactly what they don't want towards them. And again, that's for dogs that are fearful inside the house and fear bark at people. It's very interesting. And these are different things, like I said before when we were talking, that I try out different things just to see how well it'll work. And so that was a theory that I put into practice, or a hypothesis. I mix up the two. So I had an idea, I thought it would work, I did it, it worked really nicely, and I did it with multiple dogs. Are markers that predict positive reinforcement like yes the same as a marker like no? Or I say, oh, the F word instead of no in the beginning. So dogs don't have a dictionary, right? And it's just all about what the word predicts to the dog. And remember, that's really everything when it comes to working with our dogs. Our words mean to our dogs what they predict. And that's why we want to be consistent with what our words predict. So if I teach a dog yes and I give him a treat, yes means I'm going to give the dog a treat. If I say no and I give the dog a correction, no means I'm going to give the dog a correction. If I say, oh shoot, and I give the dog a correction, oh shoot means I'm going to give the dog a correction, as long as we're consistent. And the analogy that a lot of people like to use is the charging of the battery. So when you start, your marker, your battery is completely empty. Every time you say yes and you give your dog a treat, you charge that battery. Eventually, it'll reach 100%. Now, if I say yes and I don't give the dog a treat, the charge is going to go down a little bit. But if I say yes and I give a dog a treat on the next one, it's going to go back up. So you can still use it even if you don't reward all the time, although it's good practice to try to reward all the time. And I was talking with someone recently about this where they're like, what if my dog does something that I really like? I want to capture that in my dog's mind, but I don't have a reward on me at the moment. Can I still use the marker? And the answer is yes, you can still use the marker. If my dog does something really cool, I like it, I don't have a treat, I can go, yes. Now she's going to go, oh, where's my treat? And I'm going to be like, hey, good job. And I'm going to pet her and I'm not going to give her a treat. And she might be a little disappointed that she didn't get a treat, but she's going to connect that I like that behavior. And that's what's important. And then the next time I say yes, I make sure I have a treat so I don't damage the marker too much. But it's still a great way to communicate like, hey, I really like that. I marked it. I'm going to pet you because that's all I can do right now. But at least you know, and I can't give you a treat right now, but at least you know I really liked it. So it's still something that we can use in those moments. How long do I have to use positive punishment? So that's another good question. So this goes back to, and this is, so I have an article. I'm actually going to post it in the comments. For those of you that are listening, if you really want to understand these events, I would recommend reading this article. Again, I'm going to post it in the comments. It's on my blog page, and it's called Achieving Dog Training Success Through Three Key Events. And if you can understand these events and you can properly implement it into your training, you would be amazed at the results that you will start to get, because people mess up these events all the time. And a big one, so the three events, we have the reward event, the reinforcement event, and the correction event. So the reward event starts when we're going to reward our dog, often signaled to the dog by marker. So for me, I use the word free and I use get it. I also use yes, but free and get it, release my dog, and the dog enters an event. Whether my dog's going to chase the toy, or they're coming to me to play tug, or I'm giving them a few treats, it's an event. The marker pinpoints the moment in time the dog was right, but the reward event could be 5 minutes long. I could pull out a toy and play tug with my dog for 5 minutes. So that's a very long reward event. The reward event doesn't have to be a second. And again, I picked up this from Michael Ellis. I was watching one of his seminars. And I like that he used event because it slows people down. I can't tell you how many people I've worked with, they hear that you only have 1 second or 1.3 seconds to influence a dog's behavior, and that affects the way they move. This is an example I always like to tell people about a student. I was working with them with scent detection. It was still early in the training for scent detection, so we were at the stage where the dog gets to the odor and you reward the dog right away. You don't ask for an indication yet. We're getting the dog conditioned that the odor means a reward. So we were using cinder blocks. He had 6 cinder blocks, and it was in the 3rd cinder block. So he'd tell the dog to search the first one, dog would stick his nose in. He told the dog to search the second one, dog would stick his nose in. Then he would tell the dog to search the 3rd one. Once the dog stuck his nose in, his termination marker was yes. He went, yes! And said yes and threw the toy really fast. And I said, whoa, why are you getting so excited? And he looks at me and goes, I have 1.3 seconds to influence a dog's behavior. And I said, you have 1.3, and at the time I said that, but now I say roughly a second, because I couldn't find any supporting scientific data that says 1.3, but around 1 second to let the dog know that the reward is on its way. So if the dog is conditioned to yes, the moment the dog stuck his nose into the cinder block, he could have went, yes. Dog pops his head out, he goes, grab the toy, here's the toy, present the toy. He didn't have to go, yes, all excited. And a lot of people fall into that. I've even asked dog trainers, I said, how long do you have to give your dog the primary reinforcer, the actual reward, after you mark a behavior? And I've had people say, it gives me an additional second. So they think marking the behavior gives them only an additional second to get the reward to the dog. We have as long to get the primary to the dog as long as the dog is paying attention. So reward event starts when we're going to reward the dog, ends when the dog gets the reward, but there are exceptions to the rules. So let's say you're working on a stay and you use your continuation marker. Continuation marker means you're going to reward your dog, but they're not released. So if I have my dog on a climb stay and I tell my dog, yes, that's my continuation marker, my dog knows I'm going to reward my dog, but my dog must maintain the position. And this is how I do it with all the dogs I train. So if I say yes and I start walking to the dog and the dog gets up and breaks the position, I now transition into either a reinforcement event. I say wrong. Now the dog doesn't get the treat because they broke the position, and now I'm going to implement a reinforcement event. Or B, if the dog's further along in the training, I say no because the dog broke the position. Now they're going to get a correction, and then I'll do a reinforcement event after that. So a reward event could be canceled out. And then we have the reinforcement event. The reinforcement event is any time we want our dog to perform an action. If you tell your dog something and you want your dog to perform an action, whether it's a sit, a down, come to you, drop whatever's in their mouth, stop barking, if you want your dog to perform an action, then that is going to be a reinforcement event. So the biggest issue that most people have is they give up or they quit in the middle of a reinforcement event. And we're all guilty of doing this. One of my students I was working with yesterday was doing this, and I was like, I told her, I said, you just did 3 reinforcement events in a row and you reinforced none of them. Meaning, you tell your dog, sit, down, sit, and your dog didn't sit, down, or any of those things. So when we enter a reinforcement event, if you try, it takes practice. Like, this is very hard to do. But try practicing this with your dog. Give your dog a command and then make your dog do it, right? And I do the 80% rule. So the 80% rule for me is I will not correct a dog for non-compliancy to a command until the dog has proven 80% proficiency on that command in that environment. If the dog is not yet at that stage, I already know I'm going to help them if they need the help. There's not going to be any sort of correction. So and this is why we give that half-second pause after we give the command. It serves 2 purposes. Number 1, so I say down, I give a half-second pause, and then I enter the event. That's why I'm going to help the dog do the behavior with the pre-established physical cue. So that half pause does 2 things. Number 1, it gives the dog time to process the question that I just asked them. What'd you say? Down? Oh, okay. So it gives them time to process it. Number 2, it gives us an opportunity to see if the dog is going to do it Oh, and drag out the yes, and that's good too. I'm glad you brought that up. If the dog is going to do it before I intervene. So I can say down, oh, the dog's doing it. I don't have to help. I can see that in that first half second. Or if the dog's not, I'm going to enter the reinforcement event. So let's say I tell the dog down. I can tell the dog's not going to do it. I enter the reinforcement event. And I take food and I go to lure the dog into the down position. But the dog is fixated on something, ignores the food. Do I just give up? No. This is where I transition to the leash. Now I use the leash pressure. Let's say the dog resists. Do I go down, down, down? No, because now I'm adding more reinforcement events when I haven't even completed the first one. A reinforcement event could be 20 minutes, and I've done it before, as long as we don't leave the event. So if I tell the dog down and I go to lure him and the dog ignores it, and then I use the leash and the dog is resisting the pressure, I'm gonna wait the dog out. Eventually the dog's gonna lay down. Once the dog lays down, I turn off the pressure, I use my termination marker, free, dog jumps up, I give him a reward, good job. Now the dog learns, oh, I just have to do it. I didn't confuse the dog, I didn't add a bunch of new words. I'm committed to having the dog perform it when I start the reinforcement event. So now the exception to the rule, and Arm & Hammer mentioned like dragging out the yes. There's also science when you're getting a dog classically conditioned to something, if the noise continues into the primary. Meaning, if I go, yes, and then reward, the dog will become conditioned, but they actually become conditioned faster if I go, yes, and reward, while I'm still saying the word yes. But the word must start before the reward comes. It's very, very interesting. The more you study the science, it's very, very interesting. So now reinforcement event, what are one of the exceptions to the rules? I can cancel out a reinforcement event for a reward event. So let's say I'm working on increasing my recall speed. I call my dog to me. The moment the dog makes the decision to run in my direction, I use my dog's termination marker, the secondary. I go, get it! And I take my dog's favorite toy and I throw it behind me. Now my dog's gonna run past me to get the reward. So in that situation, I did not conclude the reinforcement event. I release the dog in the middle of the reinforcement event to enter a reward event. But most of the time, we're going to finish it. Now, the word wrong, when I use that in my training, that signals a reinforcement event. It's not a punishment. And that's something that often confuses people. Again, I say wrong and they hear me say wrong and they think like the dog's wrong, so I'm going to say wrong. And this is one of the most common mistakes I've seen people make when it comes to using wrong. They see me use it in my video, or even in person, and they mix up the information. So they tell their dog to do a behavior, they go down, the dog doesn't do the down, and then they go wrong, and then they make the dog do the down. Because both of those are reinforcement events, what they're actually doing in that situation is they're teaching the dog that the down means, or the down command is not down, the down command is actually down wrong, then the behavior. So we say down, and then we follow through with the reinforcement event. Now the correction event has the least exceptions to the rule, and people often make the mistake with the correction event. So let's go back to the example of the dog jumping up on the sofa. When the dog first jumps up on the sofa, if that's a rule, and if you weren't listening at that part, you came on late, I'm gonna give a quick refresher. This is how I teach it. Dog jumps up on the sofa. Let's say that's a rule. I say wrong. What do I want the dog to do? I want the dog to get off the sofa. So I use negative reinforcement, leash pressure, body pressure, whatever. The dog has to get off the sofa. Once the dog's off the sofa, I go, good dog. I don't give him a treat though, because then that would encourage the behavior of jumping up on the sofa. I do this over and over again until eventually the dog jumps up on the sofa, I say wrong, and the dog jumps off on their own. Once the dog does that, that lets me know, okay, the dog had a chance to learn the rules. The next time the dog jumps up on the sofa, it's not going to be a reinforcement event. It's going to be a correction event. So now the dog jumps up on the sofa and I'm going to say no instead of wrong. And now the dog's going to experience a correction event. Now, a correction event starts, usually I signal it by using the word no, and it ends the moment the dog receives the correction. It doesn't end when the dog instantly complies. It doesn't end if the dog tries to evade. It doesn't end if the dog freezes in place. It ends when the dog receives the correction. So think about if you're speeding on the highway and you see those red and blue lights start flashing behind you. You don't pull over to the side and the police officer drives by and goes, good job, and keeps going. No, it's like you're getting a ticket more likely than not, at least a warning. So when the dog jumps up, and just like a dog that's classically conditioned to a word that predicts a reward, and we see a change of behavior, so we say yes, and the dog licks their lips, they open their mouth, they wag their tail, we see that change of behavior. We also see a change of behavior from a dog that's classically conditioned to a word that predicts a punishment or correction. So there's also a change of behavior, and this is where most people mess up, and they don't get the reliability that they want. And I've asked so many people this in lessons, and most people get it wrong. So I tell them, okay, you just went through all that training, your dog jumps up on the sofa, your dog's classically conditioned to no, no means a correction, and you tell your dog no, and your dog jumps off the sofa right away. What do you do? And most people say, I praise the dog, I reward the dog. And I say, no, that's incorrect. And they say, well, didn't the dog just do what I wanted them to do? Yes, they did by jumping off of the sofa, but they did what you didn't want by jumping on the sofa. The moment they trigger no, they've entered the correction event. It doesn't matter what they do, the correction is coming. So if the dog jumps up, and more likely than not, they're going to do, and that's what I call instant compliancy. So that's where we say no and the dog complies right away. Evasion, this is where the dog goes, you're not correcting me, I'm out of here. We have the dog that freezes in place, and then we have the dog that runs to the human. These are the most common, and this is, arm in hand, yeah, a lot of people are guilty of this. So now the dog jumps up, you say no, the dog jumps off right away. If you say good dog at that point, your dog just learned I can jump up on the sofa whenever I want, as long as I jump off when you say no. But if the dog jumps up and you go, no, and then you get up and you walk to the dog and you give your dog the correction, the dog is going to realize that that event was connected to the no was connected to their behavior of jumping up on the sofa. If they want to avoid that correction event in the future, they don't jump up on the sofa. And it works incredibly, incredibly well. So imagine this. This is a good way to think about how it would work in the dog's mind. Imagine 10 years from now, you can buy an AI robot that looks indistinguishable from a human. And you can program that robot to do whatever it is that you need. So let's say it comes with some pre-programming. It can paint the house. It can do the dishes. It can clean the house. It can do all kinds of cool things. And you program certain rules for the dog training. And you program the AI robot that it doesn't matter what the AI robot is doing. If it hears you say no the way that you do it as a marker, so not normal conversation, but you go, no, like however you do it, so it's distinct. The moment the AI robot hears you say no, it has to stop what it's doing, and it has to make a beeline to the dog, and it has to give the dog a leash pop correction. And there's nothing that the dog can do that can prevent that from happening. That dog would quickly avoid behaviors that triggered the no because the correction was guaranteed because we took out the human element. So it's like, no, oh no, here comes I can't get away from it. All right, I'm going to get the correction. Okay, I'm not going to do that behavior again. And then we get more reliability. So that's important to understand as well. So these events, as simple as they may seem, it's very, very difficult for most people to do. So it's something you want to practice. Okay. And so, that was the question. So how long do I have to use positive punishment? I think that means like after you mark the behavior, how long do you have to correct the dog before you lose that window? As long as the dog is focused on the event, you have that amount of time. So if I tell a dog no, and I get up and I start walking towards the dog, even if the dog runs away from me, and I just continue to walk towards the dog, I'm like a very slow moving heat-seeking missile. I don't run at the dog because that's going to make him run away. I don't get over here and make all kinds of angry faces because that's going to definitely make the dog not want to come. I just walk very neutral, and I walk towards the dog, and the dog might even be like, he's still coming. He's still coming. Gosh darn it, he's still coming. And then I get the dog, I get him a correction, he gets the correction. Okay, now the moment the dog gets correction, it's done and over with. And again, the correction is never personal. I'm just being a good, compliant human. That's the way that I look at it. There's rules in place, and I'm just being the compliant human. And so if we leave the event, then we lose the opportunity to correct the dog. Okay. Are markers that predict positive reinforcement like yes? Oh yeah, I already saw those. Is it okay to correct behavior reactions like barking when the dog is fearful of a human? So I don't like to use positive punishment to correct a fear-based behavior. If we use positive punishment to correct a fear-based behavior, we are usually more likely than not increase the actual fear because we are solidifying the fear. The dog goes, I'm afraid of the human, bark, bark, correction. I knew I was afraid of the human. And I knew there was reason to be afraid. So when we correct, we actually solidify the fear. So a good rule to follow is never use positive punishment to try to fix a fear-inducing behavior. And rewarding calm behavior when the dog doesn't react from a distance. So we definitely want to reward calm behavior. You know, rewarding behaviors that we want a dog to repeat is always a good idea. And then, of course, randomizing it to keep the dog interested and motivated in the training. But if I'm correcting a dog for fear-based behavior, they're probably, again, going to become more fearful. So what I would rather do in that situation is for fear-based behaviors, again, I always say counter conditioning, desensitization, habituation, behavioral adjustment training. These are the main scientifically proven techniques to work with fear-inducing behaviors or behaviors that are being triggered by fear-inducing stimulus. So if I can increase the distance, if I can reduce whatever it is the dog is afraid of, that's going to be ideal. And then often redirecting the dog to a preferred behavior. Increasing distance is a great way. So when we're desensitizing, again, we're reducing whatever it is that the dog is afraid of. And usually that's by volume. We decrease the volume, we increase the distance, or we decrease the size. And usually by doing one of those three things or a combination, we make whatever it is less fearful to the dog, we pair it with something positive, and over time, we change the way the dog perceives the fear-inducing stimulus. Those are the best approaches. They take a long time, depending on how bad the fear is, but scientifically proven through plenty of trial and error with lots of different people, that seems to be the best. And that's the best that I've done with all the training that I've done working with fearful dogs and aggressive dogs. Sorry, my computer's freezing up a little bit. Are we still going? I'm having some issues here. Maybe the connection is bad. How do you deal with a dog who is intimidated by the helper? So I hope we're not losing connection. Maybe I'm just losing connection a little bit on my end. So the next question, how do you deal with a dog who is intimidated by the helper? So that's complicated too. So that's one where a lot of times it's going to come down to the skill of the helper, but also working the dog with different helpers that the dog perhaps isn't fearful or intimidated of, and starting with, so this is like the same thing as what I like to call the environmental difficulty assessment. Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. So like I might do the foundational stuff if the dog's more confident with me, then someone else who the dog is more confident with, and I'm going to gradually continue to work with different decoys until the dog is generalized. But if I have a dog that I'm working that's cautious of the decoy, usually, because I've had this happen before, and I've worked with some incredibly talented decoys, I've been very fortunate in that aspect, and they change their approach to be better with the dog. So instead of being frontal, we turn away from the dog. We use more prey sort of driven behaviors. So I'm afraid of the dog, or I'm moving away from the dog. The dog is creating fear in me, which is increasing the dog's confidence. That's where becoming an actor works really well. So yeah, I think I'm having connection issues on my end. That's was just on the computer. So by getting lower to the dog's level, by turning away from the dog, by reacting more to the dog's behaviors, these things will help increase the dog's confidence. But there's definitely a lot to it. And if you're working with decoys, you should be able to start figuring out how to start minimizing whatever it is that's creating the stress to build the dog's confidence, and then also doing in situations outside of that specific decoy to build the dog up. Okay. All right, where was I? All right. Sorry, I don't know where I was. So I some of the comments it's not showing now, but I'm going to jump to the next one. Okay, so this question, and this is a very common one, how often should you train your dog and for how long? That's going to really depend on your schedule. It is a very common question. That's why I recently posted the video on my dog's daily routine when I'm able to get it in. So I don't always get the whole routine in, but I try to get in as much as I can. So it is going to depend on your schedule. If you can get one obedience session in with your dog a day, when I say obedience session, I mean like a kid going to school, right? That's different than learning in the real world, right? We're always learning, but going, sitting at a desk, the teacher's talking, very formal, right? That's what I mean when I say obedience session. You have your climb bed, if you're using one of those, you have your vest, the treats, you got your dog, and you're doing sit, come, spinning the dog, you're working all these different things. Then that is, if you do one of those a day, you're doing more than most people. But again, if we want our dog to be balanced, we want to incorporate different things. That's why with my dogs, I'm happy to get one session of obedience in a day if I can get that. I try to get in fetch with them every day. I try to do exploration with them every day. I try to give them plenty of time to play and hang out with each other. I try to get in tug sessions. So I try to get as much as I can to maximize the quality of life that my dog experiences. And that's how I schedule my routines too. If I get a brand new dog, so any of you that are thinking either you have a new dog or you're thinking about getting a new dog, this is how I structure it. And it's going to depend on what my schedule is, but this is how I think about it. The first thing I think about is, what is my dog going to be doing the most of during the day? So my dogs spend most of the day hanging out with each other. So in total, I usually get around 2 to 3 hours, I would say, of actual interaction with them, and not always that. That means like when I'm playing fetch with them, or I'm doing my exploration, or I'm doing obedience. But a lot of the time they're hanging out and playing with each other. Right now, that's what they're doing. They're not in here right now. I don't have additional distractions. They're hanging out with each other. They're hanging out in the garage, or they're running around in the backyard, and they're having a good time. So if I know the dog is going to spend the most amount of time, let's say I worked 6 hours a day and I leave the house. Well, if my dog's going to be alone for 6 hours, that's my first focus. I want to teach the dog how to perform and act in the environment they're going to spend the most amount of time in. So this is house training and yard training. That's priority number one. How long is it going to take me to get the dog to where they can stay free and loose in the house and in the yard without any issues? So house training and yard training. Then I think after that, what am I going to be doing next? What is going to take up the next most amount of time? Well, if I want to do so, my dogs, the next thing is all those other activities. So the exploration, playing fetch, doing bite work, doing frisbee, doing the obedience. So those, and going out and walks and things like that. So that means the next important thing is building communication, which that's actually the first thing, because I use that for the yard and I use that for the house. What would you say are your top 3 sessions? Well, with training and working with a dog, the most important thing is communication. Like, I can't stress that enough. It's teaching the dog how we're going to communicate with them. It's so important. There's been so many sessions. So let's say someone reaches out and they have a dog that's reactive on leash. And so they want that problem fixed. So they call a dog trainer. And I show up, and it's the first time I'm meeting them, and it's the first time I'm meeting their dog, and they're standing outside in front of their house with their dog, the whole family. The dog's there on leash, and they're like, all right, let's go on that walk. And I go, not yet. I haven't even talked to your dog at all. I can't take your dog on a walk and expect them to listen to me without talking to the dog. I can use a lot of force. I can use a lot of pressure. If the dog's really food motivated, I might be able to do some stuff. But we're going to have much better results if I take the dog inside the house first. I build a quick relationship, pet the dog, say hi, whatever. I start doing some engagement work. I teach the dog the lure, and you can do that pretty fast when you're good at it. Most dogs, I can teach a basic lure, and I can teach basic leash pressure in under 30 minutes. So that's like the first thing. Now, when I take the dog on the walk, I'm actually able to communicate. Now, in 30 minutes, I'm not going to have them conditioned to the markers, but I can get them to understand how to follow a lure and the leash cue, and I can still start incorporating the markers into the obedience. And then I'm going to start utilizing that. So for me, the most important thing is developing those communication channels. And then after that, I spend a lot of time showing the dog the physical cues. So the luring into the positions, the spin, I like to do a lot of work that increases my dog's athletic abilities. So I've said it in my videos, I'm training athletes. I like to treat my dogs like athletes. Now that's what I like to do. That may not be what some like my dogs are not the best family dogs, meaning they're very, very high energy. They're fine. Like they've been around my daughter and she's 2 and she gives them treats and they're very sweet, but they're crazy high energy. So anytime they're around, I'm also around to make sure they don't accidentally knock her down. Very high energy, and I built up that energy. I like that energy. I like to incorporate it in my obedience. So I train my dogs to amplify those sort of characteristics and traits. If you don't want that sort of crazy wild energy, you might intentionally slow down a little bit to get the dog to be a little bit more methodical in their movements, but less crazy in the excitement and the energy. So how we approach it based on what our end goal is going to be very dependent, or how we, is going to be dependent on our goals and what we want our dog and how we want them to perform. Okay. Okay, so someone's asking about the dog, dealing with the dog lunging at cars. Now, this is another thing that's people have asked about different things. So let me put it this way. If you go through the entire course on Sit, Stay, Learn, and you practice all the exercises and all the routines, and you do all that stuff, it is a decently long course. It's 5.5 hours. If you do all that and you have a good understanding of how to implement it, and you understand the reinforcement event, the reward event, the correction event, hey, I could talk jujitsu for hours. If you understand these things and you develop the skills, you can handle most situations. I would say 90% of the situations that you're going to come across, maybe even more, 98% possibly, 99% maybe, you're going to be able to handle most situations by understanding all the things that I teach in the course. Like, I don't directly have a video in the course of a dog lunging at a car, but in the course it teaches you how to communicate, it teaches you how to do the luring, it teaches you how to get the dog to understand how to communicate with the leash, it teaches you how to reinforce rules and expectations, it teaches you how to correct unwanted, dangerous, destructive behaviors. So it teaches all these things that you can incorporate to situations that may not be specific to what you're dealing with, like a dog lunging at a car, but you will have the skills to be able to fix that problem. In fact, I'm so confident with that. If you can't do it, reach out and get a full refund. I'm pretty confident you'll be able to. I spent, like, filming this course, I filmed the entire course in 2 days, but I spent weeks writing out the course, how I was going to do it, and it was 12 years of actually doing the work in real world situations that gave me the knowledge and the ability to be able to put the course together. So there is actually a lot that went into it. It makes me think of this story. Some of you have probably heard about it before, and I don't remember exactly how it goes, but you'll get the gist of it. This warehouse shut down and it was losing all this money every single hour that it wasn't operating. They tried everything. They couldn't fix it. They couldn't get it up and running again. And it was like creating product or something, whatever, right? So they called this expert. This expert comes in and the expert looks around and he finds a screw and he tightens the screw and boom, everything reactivates and it starts working again. And they go, amazing, thank you so much. How much do we owe you? And he says, you owe me $10,000. And they're like, $10,000? All you did was turn the screw. And they go, I want an itemized receipt. And so he wrote an itemized receipt. He put, turning screw, $1. Knowing which screw to turn, $9,999. That's the value where it comes from. So to answer the question about a lot of specific issues, the skills that you will develop within the course, if you go through the whole thing, you will be able to handle most problems. And that's how I tried to break it down. I tried to take the most valuable stuff that I've learned in my 12 years of teaching at a school, graduating top of my class, having a show on Animal Planet, training service dogs, doing decoy work, training scent detection, working with police departments, training countless dogs and clients, teaching trainers. I tried to take that and put the most valuable stuff in the 5.5 hours. I hope people who are using the course, I hope you guys really do enjoy it and get a lot out of it. Okay, so someone has a question about free shaping. When my dogs are doing something I like in the house, do you use a marker to reward it? If so, what type of marker generally? Okay, so that's a good question. If you're trying to reward certain behaviors that are non-prompted, the dog just does it, and you're trying to create that dog that actively wants to do behaviors that you like. And this is something I recommend. It does a few things. It increases confidence. It teaches the dog what behaviors you like them to perform in the house, and it helps get them conditioned to the marker. Because even if a dog's not conditioned, even so, someone's asking about the course cost. So I put a coupon code. It's listed for $97. I'm gonna write the coupon code again. I think this gives like a 40% or something. I don't know. So this is a coupon code. If you put that in, you should get a discount. I think 40% off or something like that. So for 5.5 hours, I think it's a pretty decent deal. So what was I saying? Let me see. Oh yeah, the marker. So let's say you want to capture certain, this is, people often call it capturing. So capturing is where your dog is doing a behavior in the completion already, and you're just capturing it. So if your dog goes and lays on their dog bed, I've actually mixed up this terminology in one of my videos. So capturing, like, let's say the dog goes to their dog bed and you want to capture that, you go yes or free, whatever, and you reward the dog. It doesn't matter if you're using your continuation marker, termination, or secondary termination or terminal. It doesn't matter which one, because your dog's not in a stay. So you can say any one of the markers and your dog should connect that behavior to getting a reward. Since they're not in a stay, even if you use your continuation marker, they can still come to you to get the reward. So any one of the markers works great. Okay. I have a dog with a high small animal prey drive, however, little interest in toys. How would I transfer this focus to toys? That's going to come down to the individual dog. You might have a dog that is really prey driven towards small animals, squirrels, birds, whatever, and they may not have any interest in toys. If you want to try to increase that interest, think about the same things that would kick into your dog's drive that would make them want to go after small animals. And a big one is prey drive. This is where flirt poles work really, really well for dogs that have high prey drive. So again, a flirt pole, it looks like a fishing rod. So you got the pole, it has a string and then a toy at the end, and you move it around like prey. Now, where a lot of people make mistakes, because again, it's in the small details. So common thing with people having their dog play with toys or even fetch. They throw the ball, and some dogs will run after the ball, but they will instantly stop chasing the ball once the ball stops moving. So that's one. Other dogs will run, they'll grab the ball, they'll realize the ball is no longer active, and they will release the ball. Or they will grab the ball and they'll run around with it and they won't bring it back to the human. We can fix a lot of this with the flirt pole. So flirt pole, the way that I do it when I'm moving it around, I want to make it a little bit difficult. So there's this new principle, it's called the 85% principle or 85% rule. And it was coined in 2019 by, I think, Robert Willis. I don't know the name, so look it up. But anyways, and what they discovered was 85% is the sweet spot. So 85% success with 15% failure. If you have too much success, it becomes too easy and it becomes too boring. If they have not enough, or if it's too difficult, they can give up. And this is pretty common across the board. So 85% is that sweet spot. So when I'm moving the toy around with the flirt pole and I'm bouncing it around and it's moving like prey, when the dog goes after it, I want to make it a little difficult, but not so difficult the dog gives up. And when the dog gets it, one of the things that I do is I keep the toy active in the dog's mouth. So if the dog bites the toy, so if this hard drive is the toy, the dog bites it and it goes dead, the dog may lose interest. If they bite it and the dog and it just runs away, some dogs might lose interest too. It might hurt their teeth. They might not feel good about it. So the dog bites it and then we keep it active. Next time I'm going to remember to have toys and leashes and stuff so I can demonstrate these things instead of using a hard drive. But the string is attached to the toy and I have the pole and I keep it active by doing little pulls. So now the dog has to hold it, but it's not so much that I'm going to rip it out of the dog's mouth, but I'm keeping it active. So it's like the animal, the squirrel that's been caught that the dog hasn't killed yet, and it's still alive trying to get away, but barely. So I keep it alive, I keep it active. That's going to get them wanting to hold on to it. If they do loosen their grip enough and I pull it out and it does come out, even though I didn't pull on it hard, then I reactivate it and I start bouncing the toy around again. Now the dog has to recapture it. So again, we're using that prey drive to build the toy drive. So we take something the dog is already good at and we use it to make something else stronger. Okay, where am I? Is it natural for dogs to start guessing what command you're going to say rather than listening to the command? What's the best way to get them to truly listen? Yes, that is common, and that is something I actually show in the course. And someone asked me about it. Sorry, I got to adjust in the seat. I'm getting older, so sitting down for this long. So dogs will start guessing what you're going to have them do. Now, there are two options that I usually recommend doing, and I often go with option A. So I'll tell you the two that I usually recommend. So option A, we think about the reinforcement event. If the dog guesses and they give me the wrong answer, which you see examples in the course, I demonstrate with Ari using, for this one example, using French commands, and she doesn't know French commands, and that gave me the opportunity to show the process without her actually knowing the command. Now, she started to guess. So I would say coucher, for example, and she would sit, which is assis. Assis is sit, coucher is down, debout is stand. So I would say coucher and she would sit. Well, this is the first, and this is the way that I like to do it. I gave the command. Now I enter the reinforcement event. I'm not worried about what she's doing. I'm going to give her the correct answer. So I say coucher, and let's say visualize she's in a stand. I say coucher and she sits. I walk towards her, I cue her into the down, I reward her. So I just followed through with the reinforcement event. She gave me the wrong answer, but I just followed through with the cue and got her into the down. After enough of those, I say coucher. Then she goes, it's not assis, it's not sit, it's actually down, and she goes into the position. So if the dog gives the wrong answer, my preferred approach is I enter the reinforcement event, I present the physical cue that gets her to do the behavior. And then once they do it, I reward them. Option B, this is also very common, and this works very well too. Option B is you give the dog the command. So you say, let's use the same one. You say down and your dog sits instead. Because your dog did an action, it is okay to ask the question again. So look at it like this. If I was talking to a 3-year-old or something like that, my daughter's 2 and she doesn't quite have the concept of math yet, although she can count to like 20, which is cool. But anyways, so I don't know where they start learning the concept of math. But anyways, let's say you ask someone at that level, what's 2 plus 2? And they say 2. And you go, what's 2 plus 2? You can ask the question again. So option A, you just give them the answer. What's 2 plus 2? They say 2, you go 4. Or you repeat the question back to them. And because they gave you an answer, it is not the same as repeating a command. So if I say down and the dog ignores me, and I say down again, now I'm doing a double command, which isn't good. But if I say down and the dog sits, I can pause for a moment and go down, dog lays down, yes, now I reward the dog. So dog goes, oh, down is actually to lay down and not to sit. So those are my two preferred options. Either A, I just give the dog the right answer, I follow through with the event, I make the dog do the down. That's the example I do in the video. Or B, we can ask them the question again after they've given us an answer. So we don't ask them the question again if they don't provide an answer. And then there is a third option that some people do, and this is where you would use, this is very similar to option B, and this would be a non-reinforcement marker. So this would be a signal for negative punishment. This is very similar, it's just you're verbalizing to the dog that they did it the wrong way. So let's say you use the word that's your non-reinforcement marker, meaning you're not going to punish the dog with a correction. You're not going to reinforce anything. You're just telling the dog that's incorrect. You're not going to get the treat, but you can try again. So in this example, you would say down, the dog sits, down, dog lays down, yes, reward. So those are the 3 for that. I hope that answered that question. Again, I prefer option A. From my experience, that one just seems to be a little bit more clear, and the dogs I've done that with tend to learn it a little bit faster. Okay. I've unintentionally conditioned my pup to the training vest. We all do that, which in my case is a treat pouch. Same here, treat and toy pouch. Problem is when I simply take him out for a walk, he gets too excited and starts barking. Okay, so if you condition your dog, if you classically condition your dog to some sort of signal that gives you a response you don't like, change the pattern. Uncondition them to it. And you do that the same way you would with a marker. If every time I say yes, I give my dog a treat, my dog's going to be conditioned that yes means a treat. But let's say I want to remove that. I don't want to reward my dog anymore after saying yes. Then all I do is I say yes and I don't reward my dog. So first time, let's say I'm right here and I'm my dog. First time I say yes, my dog's going to go expecting the reward. But I keep doing that over and over and over again. Eventually it's going to be, and then eventually, and then the dog's going to ignore it because it no longer predicts that. So this would be the same with the vest. The dog gets too excited, I would uncondition the dog to the vest. I would put the vest on. I would do something that doesn't involve obedience. I would take it off. I'd put it on, take it off, put it on, take it off. So then the dog goes, oh, I guess the vest doesn't always mean treats. So we can uncondition a dog from something we have classically conditioned them to, even if it's unintentional. Would you keep it this way or would you change it? Oh, so that was just a follow-up to that question. So with that question, if your dog is really excited and you like that excitement, then keep it. If you don't like it, then you can change it. So that's how I would look at it. So this falls in line with another common thing that is often presented in training. Is it okay to have a dog in a sit stay and have that dog on its own choose to go into a down stay? Is that okay? Yes and no, depending on your preference. This is a common question that's asked. If it's okay, it's always okay. Don't have it be okay one day and then not okay another. If it's not okay, it's never okay. That's part of being consistent with our dog. But this falls in line with, it's all up to you and your own rules and your own expectations. Most of the people that I teach how to train, most of my pet training clients, they allow their dog to go from a sit stay into a down stay on their own. And I tell them it's usually fine, unless you have a reason where you need the dog in a sit stay. Competition obedience. If you're doing competition obedience, you would not want to teach your dog that, because if you put your dog in a sit and your dog gets tired and lays down, you suddenly lost points. That was unnecessary. But most dogs, that's okay. So that's like a personal preference thing. Now, I don't compete with my dogs. I train competition stuff, but I do it for fun. I don't compete. The only thing I've done outside of the Tom Rose School, I did all the requirements there, and I got 95 or higher on pretty much everything, 95%. The only thing I've done outside of that was the BH obedience routine, but I still train competition style because it's fun. And so with my dogs, I don't let them go from a sit into a down on their own. And if they do, then and this is something I also do with like walk. So this leads into loose leash walking. This is a common question. If I have my dog on a loose leash walk and my dog stops to go pee, do I allow it? It's like, if you want to, but I wouldn't for my dogs, and here's why. The reason is if my dog learns that they can stop and start sniffing the ground whenever they want and I allow it, then they start to do it more frequently. But then I also don't want the dog peeing in the middle of a walk. So if I notice the dog has to go potty and they try to leave to do that, I reinforce the heel position the same way I always would. Wrong, I bring the dog back. Or if the dog's at the level of correction, then I would correct. And then once I have them walking nicely, then I say, go potty, and I release them. That would be the same way that I deal with the dog or my dogs if they want to go into a down. And let's say I've had them in a sit for a while because I'm standing and I'm talking to someone and I forgot my dog's been in a sit for 10 minutes. My dog goes to lay down. I would say wrong. I would bring my dog back up into the sit. I would go back to talking for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, and then I would say down, and I would put the dog in the down. That's how I do it. These are personal preferences. So there's lots of things that you can adjust based on your own personal preference. 5-month-old German Shepherd keeps jumping onto me, won't stop biting and chewing on hands ever. So dog jumping up. The way that I like to deal with that, if I consider it to be not dangerous or destructive, then I start with a teachable moment. So if I talked about this earlier, but again, we're already at, what is this, 3 hours almost. So you may not have heard this, so I'll quickly recap on it. So anytime my dog is doing a behavior I don't like, I start with what I call a teachable moment. So a teachable moment is where I show the dog the preferred behavior. So dog jumps up on the bed. If that's a rule, not being on the bed, I say wrong. I guide the dog off the bed. Wrong for my dogs is a signal for negative reinforcement. I'm reinforcing the behavior that I want them to do. I'm not punishing the behavior I don't want them to do. Not in the beginning. I don't let my dogs in the kitchen. Dogs enter the kitchen. Wrong. What do I want them to do? I want them to leave the kitchen. So I'm reinforcing the act of the dog leaving the kitchen. The dog breaks the stay. Wrong. What do I want them to do? I want them to go back to the stay. So you see how it's the same in all these situations. I do the same thing with the dog jumping up. Dog jumps up. I say wrong. I apply the leash pressure to get the dog off of me. Once the dog is off of me, I turn off the pressure. Dog jumps back up. I repeat the process. Now, if I consider it to be dangerous, then I will go right to a correction. So the dog jumps up, no, and I pop the leash, giving the dog a correction. And I do it just like that. No, correction. So it's not no, or not. And I definitely don't recommend kneeing your dog. So that's a common technique a lot of people do. Dog jumps up and they bring their knee and they hit the dog. The reason why I don't recommend that is because that is really, really dangerous. It's potentially very dangerous. The dog can fall back on their spine. Let's say you're outside, you don't realize it, you've gotten in the habit of kneeing the dog, and the dog is, right behind the dog is a concrete stairs. And you knee the dog and the dog falls right on the back of one of the steps, right in the center of their back. Don't knee the dogs. Bad use of positive punishment. Instead, do a leash pop. So again, dog jumps up, no, quick little leash pop, dog goes back down, yay. Now, ideally, I like to do that after I've taught the dog not to jump up. But if I have a dog and it's dangerous, dog's trying to, like, maybe the owner is older and they're afraid of falling down, I'm just gonna correct it right away. I'm not gonna go through the teachable moment. But if it's not dangerous, like my dog's jumping up on me, I don't consider that dangerous. So if I wanted to stop it, which I allow my dogs to jump up on me, I like it, I pet them, I like it. So my dogs, I do it with tug, all that. So it might seem counterintuitive with a lot of people, like, why would you do that? I like it, it's a way I connect with my dogs. But that's not everyone's thing. And again, this is where we look at personal preference. But a leash pop is a good way to stop that. Also, we were talking about the tone earlier. I'm telling you guys, if you have thought of using the tone, give it a shot. It is amazing how well it works. And I do plan on making a video on the tone. My dog is like Maverick. Would you chase him after he has the toy and runs away? Okay, so this is talking about building toy drive. And if this person is still on, because this question was probably asked a while ago. So my dog Maverick is very possessive with toys. If you give him a toy, he wants to run away with it. Initially, when I was teaching him, I did not chase him. I did a lot of where I would run away from him. So he would get the toy and I would instantly run away. And a game that I played with him was I would try not to take the toy. And again, this sounds counterintuitive. So when he would come at me, I would be like, I would try to run away, like, no, I'm not going to grab the toy. And if he cornered me and made me grab the toy, then I was like a rag doll to him. Meaning wherever he pulled the tug, I was like, oh no, whoa. And it was very tiring, super exhausting. And he would throw me all over the place. And then once I let go, then appreciate it. Love you guys as well. So once I let go, then I would run away from him again. I was like, oh no, don't get me, because he had the power to toss me around the room. So that gave him incentive to come to me. You definitely don't want to go after a dog that's possessive with the toy. It's going to make him more possessive. So playing the game of running away is a really good technique. A lot of Schützen trainers will do what they call the victory lap. So I've done this quite a bit as well. If I'm working with the dog that's possessive, I have the handler and I will bring the dog to the handler. The handler plays with the toy, early stages, using something like a tug toy or even a puppy sleeve, and they slip the sleeve or they give the dog the tug, and then we take the dog and we run in a circle with the dog. The dog's on the outside of the circle, we're on the inside, and we keep the dog's head up so they don't drop the toy. And see you later, Jimmy. And so as they're going around, we bring the dog back around back to the handler, and then they go into playing again. So by doing that victory lap and bringing the dog back, it teaches the dog you could have your victory lap, but come back and bring the reward, and then teaching a reliable recall. So like playing fetch with Maverick took a little while. He wasn't nearly as easy to teach fetch as Charlie was. My lab instinctively brought it back. So with Maverick, he had to have a really good recall. The out was a pain in the butt for him because he wanted to possess it. So I had to do a ton of value transfer for him. So this is again where we adjust for the dog. Okay, so I say catch to so catch for the dog to catch the ball. He tries his best to catch. And catching for a dog, that takes practice. So I teach all my dogs to catch, and I just do it with food. So one of the things that I do sometimes just to mess around with my dogs, my daughter loves it. I'll have them in front. I say their name, and then I throw them the food. So essentially, I'm classically conditioning their name in a sense, almost like a marker, but I don't use it as a marker. But it lets the dog know which one I'm throwing it to. So I go, Ari, and then I toss her the treat. Maverick, toss him the treat. Charlie, toss him the treat. And at first, like Maverick initially was terrible at it. It's been so long since I've been doing it with Ari and Charlie. I don't remember the early stages, but usually in the beginning, it like bounces off their nose, they miss it. But after you do this for a while, your dogs become really, really good at catching. Like I can throw a ball as far, I can take a chuck it and launch it. If my dog's out in the field, my dog can catch it. It's crazy. Okay, my 5-month-old Golden wants to meet every single person on a walk. How do I teach him to be neutral towards people on walks? That's another good question. I would stop allowing your dog to say hi to people on walks. That's one I advise against that for multiple reasons. And we want to socialize our dogs, but with socializing, you talk about treats for dogs who eat raw meat only, use freeze-dried. So if you're using, you can also use frozen raw. I've trained my dogs with frozen raw food before, but when you do that, it's like the session has to be short because it'll start to melt. But for people that want to keep their dog on a raw diet, freeze-dried food is pretty much equivalent to raw. It's not raw, even though packages say raw. It's gone through a process, but for training, freeze-dried works great. It's just rather expensive. So on walks, so for socializing is really about getting a dog within close proximity to lots of different things, but without actually interacting with them. One of the biggest mistakes we make here in America is we want everyone to come up and pet and say hi to our dogs. And usually what ends up happening is one of two things. Either A, the dog loves it and it causes them to be reactive on leash because when we don't allow it, they become frustrated. It's also harder to control the dog when the dog really has something outside of what you're offering that they find motivating, or the dog doesn't like it and they become reactive on leash as a deterrent. So to avoid this, and that's not always the case, but this is very common. So what I do with my dogs, anytime I take them out, I don't let anyone pet them, nothing. I don't like other dogs randomly coming up to them. When I do socialize them with people or other dogs, it's always in controlled environments and it's with people I know and dogs I know. So I've taken dogs to places where I train jujitsu because I know the people that I train with and they will follow directions much better than a random person I don't know on the street. And I let my dogs interact with people who come to the house, or if I take my dog to someone else's house. Those are the areas, and that's it. I let my dogs interact with the dogs, of course, with inside the family, or if I know other friends that have dogs and we want to do a little play thing, that's fine. But I don't like dog parks, and I don't let random people come up and pet my dog because it causes issues with reactivity. And I saw this video. I really wish I saved it. I mentioned it a bunch of times. There was this short that I saw on YouTube where it was a woman who lived in Germany, and she was talking about how every dog in Germany is very comfortable being out in public, and it's because of the way the culture is. Dogs are pretty much allowed everywhere out in Germany, but the culture also is like, that's your dog, I'm not going to touch your dog, this is my dog, don't you touch my dog. Just like you wouldn't want someone coming up and petting your child on the head, that's how they look at dogs out there. The dogs know this, and so they're very comfortable out in public because they don't have this either excitement with the possibility of getting pet from someone else or being uncomfortable with people coming up and randomly petting them. So to answer that question, I would not let the dog meet people out in public. I would have certain areas and I would focus on the obedience. So try not to create the habit of letting the dog go up to say hi to everybody. And once your dog, so that goes back to we talked about classical and operant conditioning, which is so important in dog training. That situation, classical conditioning, dog sees human, you let dog say hi to human. Dog has become classically conditioned. Every time he sees a human, he gets excited because now he feels like, or she feels like she should be able to see the human. Operant conditioning, dog starts to learn, pulling on the leash, getting excited, barking, brings them to the human, so they do that behavior even more. And that's something that a lot of people run into. Okay, this is just one of the reasons. Oh, thanks, I appreciate that, Arm and Hammer. Okay. Can you address how you would handle a male intact dog who rolls up to your gate? So I would just keep my dogs away from that, and I would address the human. Like, hey, can you keep your dog on leash? If it's my neighbor's dog, then that falls in line with fence fighting. And then or if there is fence fighting, and then we would have to determine, do we want to redirect? Do we want to prevent, or do we want to correct? Thank you. I appreciate that. Someone's saying thank you for the help. Any more merch coming out? I don't have any more merch. I do have this shirt. This actually isn't I didn't make this shirt. One of my friends made it and he sent it to me. But I do have a link for this shirt if you're interested. I never made any shirts like this with my name really big on it because I always thought that was a little narcissistic, like, hey, here's my name. But my buddy made it for me. He's a good friend of mine, and I like the German Shepherd on it. But that's the only new thing that I have right now. I'll get the link for it if anyone is interested. Just give me 1 second. Okay, here we go. He would be really happy if someone ordered it. I don't get any kickback from it. It's a friend of mine, and he sent it to me, and I was like, I'll rock the shirt for sure. But that's where you get those. Okay. I really would be like. What is this? I would really like to become certified just to help other people. Okay, so certified. So the course really isn't. It's not like you're going to be a certified trainer if you go through this course. And this is something that people often ask me about, like, should I go to a school? So those of you that are interested in becoming professional dog trainers, should I go to a school? What's the best way to approach it? If you can go to a school, that's great. It's good to be around other trainers. It's good to work with other trainers. My experiences going through the Tom Rose School was invaluable for my career, but it's also the individual and how much effort you put into it. I mentioned one of my friends, great trainer, on here earlier. His name is Austin. He has a business called Zero to Hero Dog Training. He didn't go to any formal school, but he's one of the best trainers that I've seen. Like, he performs very, very well. Now, he's been doing it for 2 years, and he's very humble. He's still learning, but his skill is quite good. And he didn't go to a school, but he's obsessed with training, and he trains all the time. One of my students, when I was an instructor at the school, and a good friend of mine and an amazing trainer, she's been on my YouTube channel, Maureen Cuccinella. So she went through the Tom Rose School. She graduated top of her class, and I knew she was going to be a rock star because she trained all day, every day. She was obsessed with it. So if it comes to being a professional trainer, do you need a certification? No, you don't. But I do think that you need to train a lot of dogs, and you need to be good, and you also need to be honest to your clientele. So when I started off, and even now I still do this, if I get a client and I feel like I wasn't able to help them for whatever reason, I don't charge them. And then also when I was working in the early stages, I would do stay and train, and I would always do 2 or 3 week, and 2 and 3 week stay and trains is often not enough. And the 2 weeks would finish, and I wouldn't feel like the dog was ready to go home. And I would say, if you guys want, I'll continue to train the dog for another week. Sometimes I would give them another 2 weeks, sometimes even 3 weeks, and I wouldn't even charge for that. because I was still new to it and I wanted to deliver a good service. I wanted it to be good as possible. And this helps with imposter syndrome. So I was talking to a dog trainer yesterday and they were asking me about imposter syndrome. And one of the things that has helped me quite a bit is how I express to people things that, sorry, I was getting distracted there. So I like to, and I picked this up, if any of you study any business content, there is a business guy that I follow called Alex Hormozy, and he was talking about teaching people on YouTube specifically because his platform is it's instructional. It's not just entertainment, although it's entertaining as well. He does a good job with it. But he's like, tell them what you do and not what they should do. So if you're starting out, this is what I do. This has helped me. But the moment you start telling people this is what you should do, that's where you start to get resistance. And the example he had, it's funny, but it makes a lot of sense. He goes, if I tell everybody that I ate a breakfast burrito this morning, everyone goes, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, you ate a breakfast burrito. But if I say you should eat a breakfast burrito, then everybody goes, F you, I don't need to eat a breakfast burrito. All of a sudden you get this resistance. So you say, these are the things that have worked for me. I think it'll help you. And then again, being honest and being clear with the expectations up front. But the biggest thing about being a professional dog trainer is training lots and lots of dogs. You can study the material all you want, but until you've handled lots of dogs, I'm talking at least 100 plus, you're not going to have good enough of a frame of reference to be able to deal with all the dogs. And the best way to do that is to get out there and start training lots of dogs. You can volunteer, you can train dogs for shelters, you could train dogs for rescues, you can offer free training in the beginning, you can give huge discounts, but you got to train a lot of dogs. Okay, and my battery is actually running pretty low. So I'm going to answer a couple more questions, but I am going to do more of these. And so I'll try to keep the ones in the future much shorter. Again, I really enjoy this stuff. The only thing that would make this better is if everyone was actually in the room with me and I could talk to you in person. I find that to be way more fun with a group of people, but this is still really cool. And I'd like to do more of these, so then tell me what you guys think about this. Those of you that are listening, this is what I was thinking of doing for future live Q&As, where I make it specific on one subject. This was specific on the course, but there was a lot in the course and it covers a lot of stuff. So it actually was pretty broad. And again, for those of you that are watching, if you purchased the course, if you like the course, can you please take a moment and write a quick review on the course? It would mean a lot. So if you go to the course on the webpage and you scroll to the reviews, you can write a review. It says write a review. It takes about a day for it to appear, but reviews really help encourage people to try it if they believe that it's good. And I think it's good. I put a lot of work into it. So if it's been helpful, a review would be very much appreciated. So like, for example, one of the live Q&As that I want to do would be, thank you, would be separation anxiety. So a Q&A on just separation anxiety. So everybody who's dealing with separation anxiety, we talk just about that. And then I try to stay disciplined on sticking with separation anxiety. And then one could be on just all leash reactivity. One could be on just service dog training. Or do you guys think that a broader sort of Q&A, more like this one, would be better? Yeah, Hormozy's awesome. Okay, so a couple people think it's a good idea. Very nice. Thank you. I really appreciate everybody on here. Okay, so let me ask and a bunch of hearts coming in. Okay, cool. So that sounds like a good idea. So we'll do some of those. We'll see how that goes. Okay, let's see. I want to answer a couple other books. Oh, not books. Someone said book, and so I said book. Okay, a couple other questions. OCD in the crate, when it is feeding time, he whines and constantly spins in the crate. I negative punish him by not settling down with some success, but it's still taking forever to feed. Okay, so Tim, you're using negative punishment to try to get him. So this, I think, a good thing to try with him would be what I was talking about earlier. One on just the e-collar would be good. What Austin from Zero to Hero told me how he gets the dogs comfortable in the crate. Oh yeah, so then some random ones at the end. That's a great idea as well. And more focus, yeah, which is super helpful for me because of my ADD. I've never been formally diagnosed. I self-diagnosed myself, but I'm pretty sure it's there. Especially I'm 40 and I still run around like I'm 20, and people tell me that that's a sign of ADD. So, anyways, so Tim, try the suggestion that Austin had. So, first, your dog is probably classically conditioned that when you have him in the crate and you're preparing his food, he knows it's feeding time. So you can uncondition him to that by setting it up and then don't feed him, setting him up and then don't feed him, and do that a bunch of times to where you don't get that reaction and then you could feed him. Also, doing what Austin suggested, where you just have him in a crate stay with the door open. Don't have the door closed, leave it open. That should help make him a little bit more calm. Also, telling him to go into the down position might help as well, but wait till he's calm and relaxed. And the negative punishment is a good option, but don't always reward. So that's where you're probably running into an issue where, yeah, I'm older than that and do the same thing. Yeah, so you probably have it too. Sorry, my nose itches. So Tim, try. So like, let's talk about a dog where we go to a field and we use this field only to play fetch. And fetch is the dog's favorite thing in the world. Sorry, my nose is really itchy. If I take my dog there, and every time I take my dog there, the moment my dog knows that I'm heading to the field and we're playing fetch, the moment the dog knows it, you're gonna start seeing the behavior. So let's say the dog notices right away because I grabbed the chuck it and I'm walking with the chuck it. The moment the dog sees the chuck it, he knows we're going to that field and we're gonna play fetch. Let's say I don't use the chuck it. Let's say I just have the ball hidden, the dog doesn't see it, and I take the dog on the walk, and the dog can't tell until I make a turn that leads us in the direction of the field. So if I go any other way, the dog knows. But the moment I make the turn, the dog starts to become excited because that guarantees I'm taking the dog to the field. The odds of me getting the dog relaxed the moment the dog knows we're going to the field is very low, especially if I still take the dog to the field. So if I get the dog relaxed, so the moment the dog knows we're going to the field to play fetch, and the dog gets crazy excited, and eventually I get the dog to calm down, it takes 20 minutes, let's say. Finally, the dog calms down, and I still go to the field, it's still going to be difficult because the dog's still like, we're still going to the field. But what would actually work better is once the dog knows we're going, we don't go. And we start making it to where just because we take the turn or just because the dog sees the field, it no longer means we're going to that field. That's how we can start unconditioning the dog to that stimulus within the environment that's signaling to the dog that we're going to play fetch. And that's very important because, again, that's why we need to understand that whole concept of classical conditioning. That's going to be the same with your dog in the crate preparing mealtime. The moment you start preparing mealtime, if you feed him every single time, regardless of how long you have him wait, then he's going to believe that the food is coming and that anticipation and excitement is still going to be there. So by showing him like, hey, just because I'm prepping the bowl doesn't mean you're going to eat right now, and then you let him out of the crate and you do that a bunch of times, just like that charge in the battery, eventually he's going to become unconditioned to that, and you're going to have him a little bit more calm, and then you can start rewarding him for being calm. So that's how I would probably approach it. All right, one more. Sorry, I would love to keep going, but I got to take the dogs and go play some fetch. Okay. So did I see that you have a personalized educator? Did you talk on e-collar technology about it, or did that cover to? So someone was asking about this. I just asked them to print this. So I don't know if they do that for everybody, but I'm one of their distributors. I've known the owners since 2012. And I don't know, but I have direct contact with the general manager. So often I talk to her about what videos and things like that and about the collars, because this is my favorite brand. They do have the best customer service. And I talk to them about how we're going to do videos because I think that they are the best when it comes to the quality as well as the customer service. They're hands down incredible. And so, yeah, they just asked me, they're like, do you want one with your logo? And I was like, yeah, sure. So they sent me the one with the logo. Any advice for teaching slowing down or speeding up during training? If you want, so speed, so this will be the last one. Speed is based on motivation. The more motivated your dog is, so look at it this way. If you have a dog chasing a squirrel, and squirrels are their favorite thing, or chasing a ball, they're going to run as fast as they can. If your dog is running away from a predator that they're afraid of, they're going to run as fast as they can. So whether the motivation is good or bad, speed is based on motivation. So the faster or the more motivated they are, the faster they're going to be. The less motivated, the slower they're going to be. So if you want to slow them down, you decrease the motivation. If you want to speed them up, you increase the motivation. Like, have you ever seen a dog where you tell them to go into the down and they go into the down, but they're like, and they go very slowly? That's because they're probably not very motivated. So by increasing the motivation, increase the speed. Okay, so I think that's good for today. I think this is my record on live Q&As, 235 minutes. If you stuck around the entire time, how to get good recall at off-leash trail. So for me, the recall, off-leash, I use the remote collar. So I'm gonna make a video again on the tone so you can see it in action. It works so well. If you have one of these collars, I recommend messing around, experimenting with the tone. You just have to be really good, because the tone, it's negative reinforcement if you're using it the way that I use it. When your dog complies, you have to turn it off. That's the biggest thing. So the dog has to know what behaviors triggers the tone and what behavior causes the tone to go away. And it works very, very well. But again, I'm going to do a lot more of these. We're going to do some more on specific certain subjects, broad ones. We're going to have a lot of fun with it. If you were here the entire time, you're a rock star. Thank you so much. And for those of you that were coming and going, because this was incredibly long, thank you for coming in, for checking it out, for asking questions. I'm sorry I couldn't get to all of them. Even if I didn't get specifically to your question, I hope the information that I provided was valuable. Again, thank you. You guys all mean the absolute world. I love the fact that I have this channel. It's one of the coolest experiences that I had within dog training, just because of the reach that it's allowed me to have. It's so really cool. So thanks again. And if you did get the course, if you enjoy the course, take a moment to write a review. It would mean a lot. And I will see everybody in the next live Q&A. And if you want to reach out to me directly, if you're interested in becoming a dog trainer and you want someone to be able to help mentor, I mentor a lot of dog trainers. So feel free to reach out, nateschoemer@gmail.com. So you can email me there, or nate@nateschoemer.com. I check both of those. Or if you just want a better pet and you want to schedule a lesson, I do virtual training sessions as well as in person. So right now I'm in Eugene, Oregon. We're trying to move to Indiana, Carmel, Indiana. So we have family out there. So we'll be in the Chicago and Indiana area. I have family in Chicago as well. So if you're in that area and you want to link up and do some training, I'd love to meet a lot of you in person. So how often will I be doing the live Q&A? I want to do minimum, thank you for that as well, Octavio, I appreciate that. I want to do a minimum of one a week. That's the minimum that I want to do. Really, if I could, I would do one every day, Monday through Friday, because that would give people a little bit more flexibility to come in when it's a better time for them, as well as not having to listen to 4 hours. So shorter ones, but more frequent. But minimum, I want to do one a week. So that's minimum. And most, if I could get it, 5 a week would be really, really cool. So that's the goal. But again, minimum a week. And I'll post soon when I'm going to do the next one, so we can schedule that and we can all talk and have a good time. And my voice is getting a little raspy as well, talking so much. So thanks again, everybody. And we'll see you in the next one.